So I'll crack on if I can. I suspect we'll get a few more people joining us as we progress. So welcome everybody, and welcome to the first Integrated Care Board. I think this is a great opportunity for us, and it also gives us as leaders in the system a lot of responsibility for how we actually progress the Integrated Care Boards, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of that as we go through today. Just a few welcomes before I start. So we had the Shadow Board meeting in June. Ellen and Will weren't with us there, so welcome to Ellen Donovan, who's one of our non-exec directors, and Will Warrender, who's the CEO from South West Ambulance Service. So welcome to you both. A couple of other welcomes. First of all, Lance from Health Watch. Lance is replacing Vicky and Georgie, who can't be with us today. So Lance, you're welcome. And then perhaps before we start, I would like to just say some thank yous. I think particularly to Ellie, Sarah Carr, Sarah Weston, and there is many others, Seb as well, for just the hard work about getting us to the start line. Ordinarily, you've had papers quite late for this board meeting, and that isn't the way we want to continue. But I think, we just had such a hiatus of issues to deal with, even to the point of 8 o'clock this morning, having to agree appointments to the board, which I've done prior to us starting. So this isn't usual. And I think today we will cover quite a lot of process issues. So hence, that's why we're doing it on Teams. From now on, we probably won't do the meeting on Teams, and we will look to rotate it across locality partnerships so that people can see us on the ground, and the members of the public have a chance, or the press, to come and listen to what we're discussing. A welcome to those members of the public who've joined us for the meeting today. I think we've got about 7 or 8 people, and to the press as well. And just a reminder to board members, this is a meeting in public. It's not a public meeting, but the meeting is being recorded. So it'll be recorded for us to be able to transcribe issues, but also for transparency as well. So I've got a couple of apologies. First of all, I'll start with Shane, which ordinarily the chief executive not to be there for the inaugural meeting would be a bit strange, but it's his son's graduation today, and I think, I do know, having gone through that with a number of children, to have missed that would have been catastrophic. And I'm sure, everybody has had lots of contact with Shane over the last few weeks, and he's assured me it won't happen again. So he won't be with us, but he is ably deputised by Sarah, who will pick up the CEO inputs and the necessary content for Shane during today's meeting. Only a couple of other apologies. I've mentioned Vicky and Georgie. Eugene, CEO of University Hospitals Bristol and Weston's given his apologies. I did have apologies from Joe Walker from North Somerset, but Joe, I can see you've joined us. So obviously that's obviously that I've got that wrong. So yeah, welcome. And I think before we actually go into the business, I would just like to start with what our purpose is as an integrated care board. So as the board, we know that we've got the responsibility for delivering the health and social care strategy that will be set for us by the partnership, and also a lot of national priorities that will come out. But we have got 4 stated aims, and they are about improving population health, reducing health inequality, increasing value for money and productivity, and supporting social and economic development. And I think we all agree that just dealing with the here and now is never going to be the way we would want to approach health and social care, albeit we do know that demand is considerable, so that we can't just turn the tap off, but that has to be our stated purpose. And I think we will see that playing out in the boards, particularly in the ICB, because that delivery function is going to be critical. So just a couple of ground rules for today. I think most of us now are pretty well versed with Teams. If you can raise your hands virtually, if you can, in the normal fashion, I'll try and bring everybody in, because we've got well over 30 people in the meeting at the moment. With members of the public, so I won't see everybody on the screen. If you do want to bring stuff to my attention, please put it into the chat bar. I should be able to pick it up from there. And I will try to make sure that we can bring in any questions we've got from the public towards the end of the meeting, time permitting. Finally, I do appreciate some people have got to might have to dip in and dip out, or might have to leave us early. We try to order the agenda so that those items that need Core C for approval are at the front end of the agenda, so we can deal with those first, because we are a statutory board and we do need to make sure that we agree those things. And that gives us more space at the end of the agenda for the issues that are for review and discussion. So without further ado, is there any points or questions anybody wants to raise before I move into the declarations of interest? Okay, I can't see anything, so I will press on. You will have seen circulated a prepared list of declarations of interest. We are a large board, so I won't go through those individually, but they are there for everybody to see. It's undoubtable with the breadth of areas we're covering over the next few years that there will be declarations of interest will appear. Can I just ask if there's anything on that list that anybody hasn't disclosed that they'd want to mention before we start? Jaya.
Only just to say that because I have many different roles and relationships with different businesses on the transparency front for my day job, I'll have to declare the things as they come up as opposed to putting them in one line. It's not practical to list everything.
Yeah, I think that's fine, and there's inevitability around that, in particularly your role. But yeah, if we can just make sure that we are declaring that at the start of meetings. Steve.
Well,
it's very similar, Jeff. I've got nothing to declare that's relevant to today's agenda, but in the future, as CEO of the university and also the chair of the Academic Health Science Network, there may be occasions. So nothing today, but possibly in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Anything for anyone else before I progress? No? Okay, thanks very much. So, Sarah, I think you're going to pick up the CEO briefing for us. Once we've done that, we will go into the substantive items around the Constitution. But Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Jeff. And I just wanted to convey, particularly today, Shane really wanted to give you all massive apologies. If it was anything else, he would have missed it. But he felt there are a few key messages that he really wanted me to convey to you. I think it's really about just the sort of real importance of today. We've been working together in partnership for a while, but this is different. This is about us now. We are the ICB. There's no third party. This is about all of us around this table, making decisions for our population, really, as Jeff says, to improve those outcomes in population health, reduce inequalities, enhance productivity and value for money, and our wider social and economic development role. And just that power of partnership, the sort of opportunity for us to achieve much more together than we could have as one. And we have come a long way in the last few years. So there's a lot of good groundwork for us to build on, but I think a real opportunity for us to accelerate our progress. And we'll want to think together sort of over the next few months about how we make sure we're bringing all of our organisations with us on that journey as we move forward. So that was, it was really not a huge amount that Shane wanted to bring in, but really just wanted to make sure that we sort of just reflect on that moment together, that this is about us, and genuinely this is about us having equal voices in planning and what we can achieve for our population. So that was all I was going to say, Jeff. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. And I would reinforce that's a really important point. We often hear talk about the system, and we are the system. So ours is a coordinating role, but we are the system, and we have got great opportunities as we move forward. I think everyone knows that. I think most of us have worked together quite closely over the last few years, and I think we all agree in principle that carrying on in splendid isolation is never going to deliver the best for our citizens and for our patients. So I know everybody's up for this. I think the devil is often in the detail, but we need to be quite bold, I think. So thank you, Sarah. Any questions for Sarah before I move into the governance matters? No? Okay, thanks very much. So the first item on the agenda is the establishment of the ICB board members. As I said, we've met to discuss this morning and agree, but Julie, can you just take us through the paper? You should have had it circulated, so I suspect you can do some of this by exception, but Julie, if you can take us through it, that'd be really helpful.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Morning, everybody. Yes, so we met as Jeff, Shane and I met as an appointments committee this morning to confirm the appointments to the ICB board. As you know, it's a statutory requirement that we have an ICB board, and we have executive members, non-executive members, partner members and other members. And we went through each group and confirmed those appointments this morning. I can go through the list if you like, but they are contained in the report which was circulated, so I'm happy to take that as read and just say that we did confirm every appointment this morning, and therefore it's the duty of the board to note that appointment, and that does mean that we are actually a quorum board for today's business.
Okay, thanks, Julie. So the paper has been circulated. You can see who are attributed members of the board. Any comments or questions from anybody as the board members to note? No? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Julie. I'll move us on to the next item then, which is the ICB Constitution. Again, thank you to everyone who's put all the work into this, because there's been a huge amount of consultation around it, but also making sure that we've got everything that needs to be contained. Of course, we had a model constitution provided to us by the NHS nationally, so we have followed that as best as we possibly can. We then have a responsibility to make sure that the NHS in our region had signed off the constitution, which they have, and that's gone through that process. So we are in a position to present the constitution to the board. As I said, it's been agreed by the region, but just ask, is there any questions before I move to approval of our constitution from any board members? John.
Jeff, thank you. Hi, my name is John Hayes. I've just been appointed this morning as the primary care representative lead on the ICB. So good morning, everybody. Jeff, a couple of questions. The first one was at 3.5.5 in the document, which talks about a 12-month extension of serving officers at chair's discretion. And I just wondered, for clarity, whether that means a 12-month extension at the end of each 3-year term or at the end of 2 consecutive 3-year terms. And the only reason I ask is that one thing that COVID taught us is that the potential unpredictable interferences of things like that could mean that you need to roll things over at times that might otherwise be unexpected. And I just wondered whether that needed a little bit of clarity.
Yeah, so I'll pass to Julie in a second, John, but we had quite a lot of conversations about this, because it's fairly unusual to establish a new board, but what it means is everyone does the same tenure, so that we end up with everybody finishing at the same time, which never works effectively. So some people, I think, would want to finish at the end of their 3-year term, but we would look at that and whether we continue it. And I think it's just gives us that flexibility to be able to say, particularly for non-exec members, that we can continue people for a longer period. We have had that discussion about other partner members. If you're a chief executive of an organisation and you're there for 10 years, does that mean you can't sit on the ICB if you're the chief executive if you've been there some time? So I think we're going to have to puzzle through that one as we go through a little bit. But Julie, I know we've had a lot of conversations on this. So anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I think it's broad on this, so I do think we could interpret that to extend a 2-year term if we wish. As you say, we have to look back at first principles, why we need it and why we would want to use it. So I don't think it's been specific, whether it's just at the end of the term, the final length of service, or whether it's at the end of the first term. But I believe we've got the flexibility on that.
Cool. Thank you. And then the second one was at 3.13.3. I just didn't understand that line, and I just wondered whether actually it means whether it refers back to 3.13.2, because it says 3.13.3 members may be suspended pending the outcome of an investigation into whether any of the matters in 3.13.3 apply, and it's a sort of infinity loop.
I'm just reading it again now, John. I can see your point. It does seem to be a virtuous circle, doesn't it? Julie, I don't know whether you've got any observations on that, or whether Sarah Weston has.
I think we may need to take that away to clarify it, but I'm not sure if someone has the hand up, Jeff, so it could be Sarah.
It's not me with my hand up, but I would agree, Julie. I think that may be some of the statutory wording we were provided with, but I'll take that away and check that.
I think it's probably just a typo, and I suspect it means 13.2 just above it, that is referring back to the line before. But
John, I think it does. I think
it's a typo.
it is that, isn't it? It should be 13.12 because it is referring to the length of points from A to F.
Yeah.
On the with the exception of the chair board member shall be removed from office, etc.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably just a typo.
We'll get that amended.
Thank
and
you.
last point from me, 30. There's 14.1, 31.14 around the role of the remuneration committee to set remuneration for ordinary members. And I just wondered whether it should also include partner members, because having been elected by the GP practices across the piece, we need to then have a conversation about how I'm going to be resourced to be able to attend. Conflict of interest duly declared, but we can have that conversation offline. But I just wondered.
No, John, I think it's a good point. It is probably only relevant to those in private sector or in your case a GP, because obviously abstraction from day-to-day surgery, you know, you lose money to be able to come and do this role. So I completely understand that. Julie, I think that's right, and I think perhaps Ellen we can talk about that when we come to REMCOM. But I think that does need to pass through somewhere, John, doesn't it? If there's going to be remuneration for you as a GP to attend the board, we need to make sure it goes through the right governance.
Cool.
And the same for anybody else if they become partner members of the board. I think it will probably be unique to you as a GP, but yeah, I agree. I think it does need to go through the REMCOM process. So, Julie, we just need to make sure we capture that.
Marvellous.
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
fine. We can change the terms of reference. Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
John. Thanks, John. Ruth.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I was just referring to the document that was circulated this morning. It seems to me as though there are a couple of other members that aren't included on that list of appointments to the board. Particularly thinking about myself and Health Watch.
So I think it's actually members, so participants are not mentioned on there, Julie, if I'm right. So both Health Watch and if you haven't been elected through the process, then you'll be a participant on the board and not a member of the board. I think that's the, Julie, am I right?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
So hence that's not there. So all it would mean, Ruth, is that you won't have the same rights of voting that others, but actually all the same access. So I would hope that you would be in attendance at all our board meetings as and when you possibly can be. But you won't have the same voting rights. No, hence, you know, we've had lots of conversations about this. But hopefully that explains it for you.
Okay.
And I'm happy to chat that one through offline if you'd like to have a chat about it later.
Thanks, Jeff.
Any other points on the Constitution? So are we happy to agree the Constitution then as it stands? I'll take, unless there's any hands go up to the alternative, that we are happy to agree it. Okay, great. Thank you very much. So Sarah, perhaps I can move on to the scheme reservation and delegation.
Thank you, Jeff. So the scheme of reservation and delegation is here for approval. It's basically, we had a quick discussion about this when we met in shadow form. It hasn't changed since then. It's been developed in accordance with the national legislation and the guidance. It is something that over the next few months we will want to come back to and iterate. as we reflect on how we make decisions across all of us as a system. It has been to NHSEI and we haven't had any comment back either. And the functions and decisions map, you will all be very familiar with. A lot of you have been a key part in collaborating to develop this. So again, that's here for approval. So I'm happy to take any questions, but that's all I really wanted to draw out.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that, Sarah. Dominic.
Thank you. Just a quick one, which is the, and I'm not sure what they're called, the PowerPointy graphics at the back. There's no reference in. Sorry, that's the map, is it?
That's the delegation, the functions and decisions map. Yeah.
So there's no reference in there to the proposed mental health provider collaborative, and I would be grateful if there was, please, because although it's still in gestation, it's absolutely our intent to deploy that to support mental health service delivery.
Okay, so I think at the moment, Dominic, this sort of reflects where we are as at the moment. I think absolutely we need to keep updating this as things develop. So yeah, very happy to work with you as that thinking develops so that we can incorporate that.
I guess, so to push back, Sarah, I guess
Yeah.
in terms of parity of esteem, the argument might be it mentions the acute provider collaborative, but it doesn't mention the mental health provider collaborative, but they're both in the same stage of development. So.
Okay, happy to pick that up outside. Thank you.
Can I just bring Sarah Weston in on that? Because I know that again, this schematic is, I think it is work in process, and I do think whilst we have a statutory responsibility to agree things today, and I'll mention this as we come on to committees, I think there's a lot of work to be done about how we actually operate and what we do. So Dominic, I think that's a fair challenge. Sarah, I mean, has that come up in the discussions up until now?
Honestly, no. I think just because there's just been some examples cited there, if the board are in agreement, I see no issue with citing the mental health provider collaborative as an example in the way that we have with the acute provider collaborative on the first page. Yeah, I see. We could certainly add that text in to the version that goes onto the website if the board are in agreement to do so.
I just checking with other board members. Is there anyone in disagreement with that? I mean, I think this all has to be about us as a collective as opposed to as individuals. So I mean, but I guess when you start to look at that schematic, there'll be lots more that's in there. I think we've put those under bold headlines, but as you start to go down into locality partnerships, I mean, there's a huge amount of other contribution that's going to be there. And we're possibly in danger of over illustrating it. But Dominic, I completely agree with you that needs to be, you know, that's not an intent to exclude people. So I'd be more than happy to add it in. I've got a couple of hands gone up. Ruth and then Steve.
Thanks, Jeff. I was just going to say in terms of equity or parity, there's also an out of hospital provider collaborative that we're in the process of setting up. So the problem is you risk then just the list is getting ever longer, isn't it? And what do you include and what don't you include? It's almost better not to include anything than to feel that some are excluded.
Yeah, and we did have this conversation when we were putting it together, which is how do you avoid it looking hierarchical, and how do you ensure that you capture everybody? Well, you know, you can't. I mean, there's just too much in there. I think Dominic, the point is well made, though. I think we should minute that, and I think we should make sure that the contribution of the mental health collaborative is drawn straight into the board, and I know you'll do that anyway as a contributor. Steve.
Yeah, I was just going to say exactly the same, Jeff. I think it's important that mental health is there. It is clearly a very significant part of the work that we're going to have to focus on in terms of health inequalities, so it seemed to be sensible.
Thanks, Steve. Dominic, are you happy with that?
I'm happy to a degree, and I'm sure you know this, Jeff. I was making the point for effect, really. Exactly what goes into the chart, I'm less worried about. I just want to make sure we don't forget about that piece of work, really.
No, I think it's a fair challenge, and you know, nationally we've been having a lot of conversations about where mental health appears, and it's, you know, it can be very tempting just to deal with the acute demand that's facing the system at the moment and start forgetting about some of the underlying issues. You know, that is not going to happen. You know, that's why I started with what the purpose of the ICB is. We have to focus on underlying issues, not just what's presented here and now, which is also mental health, of course. But so yes, please push back. I think that is the purpose of this board. If we're not able to come together and challenge, then it'll be a pointless exercise for us. And there's a lot of people, there's a lot of money sat around this table. So thanks, Dominic. I think it's a good point. Any other points on the scheme of delegation? And anything else anyone else wants to raise? Okay, so can I just check then that we are happy to approve that? Yep, okay, thank you. Can I take us on to the next item then, the ICB committee terms of reference? And perhaps if I start off on this, and then I'll bring in the non-exec chairs of the committees and talk about some of the work that we've been doing to think about how the committees operate. So I'll go to Ellen first with the remuneration committee, because we do need to agree some membership there, and with the quality outcomes performance. Then to Jaya, then to Steve, then to Alison, and then to John. First of all, you'll know at the last Shadow Board meeting, I talked about using your time to best effect. And if we don't delegate effectively to our committees, then as a board, we're going to be meeting for 6 hours. Well, that's just not realistic. So I think a 2-hour meeting where we've got people at the level you're at in your organisations, we're actually going to you know, be able to build that into your diary. I think anything else is unrealistic and it won't be productive either. So we do need to make sure our committees are functioning effectively. You will know that I've gone out and asked for non-exec representation on the committees. And I've spoken to all your chairs about that to make sure that we are getting an external view on the issues that are being discussed there, and that that can then transport back into your own individual organisations. Now, there's been lots of questions about how does this cut over governance of our existing organisations. And I think at the moment, we probably can't answer all of those questions effectively, but our committees do have to add value, not replicate what you're doing in your own individual organisations. If they start to do that, then they become dysfunctional and pointless. So I have asked the chairs of the committees to do 2 things. One is think about the things that we have a statutory responsibility to cut through our committees, and they may be many and varied. But the other is about how do you position the conversation there about the 4 key aims within an ICB, about thinking more strategically and transforming the way we deliver health and social care, because we'll be in danger otherwise of just becoming process-led. And I don't think any of us want that, because this is our opportunity. If we get into that frame, then we will continue to do so for years to come. So here's the chance for us. I do think we're asking the terms of reference to be agreed. We've got a statutory responsibility to do that. I do think they will develop and change. And I am going to ask the chairs to, if there's significant changes there, that they're bringing them back into the board for agreement. But I think we need our chairs to have enough flexibility, because you know they're senior people, to be able to run those committees in a way that we will trust what they're dealing with and what comes back to the board. As the chair, I'll try and attend those committees as best as I possibly can to make sure that we have the read across the different functions. So I'll pass individually to our 5 non-exec directors who are chairing those committees, just to talk about briefly what they've done up until now to form them. Perhaps first of all, if we could go to the remuneration committee, because we are going to have to make some decisions on that this afternoon. We statutorily require a certain number of partner members to be on there. And I understand that Mike, Maria, Dominic and John have all agreed to do that. When we do meet this afternoon at 2:15, be reassured that our partner members, it'll be quite brief. You'll just need to agree the non-exec director remuneration, and the rest of the time can be spent with our non-exec directors and Sarah and Julie, of course. But Julie, can I just pass to you on that first of all, before I pass to Ellen, around the remuneration committee and what we need to agree?
Do you mean what we need to agree at today's remuneration committee later on, or these terms of reference?
So I just think appointments, we need to agree appointments, don't we? I don't know whether you're able to, or Ellie, if she's on the call, just to talk through the membership of the Remuneration Committee before I pass to committee chairs to talk around the other 5 committees.
That's fine. So the Remuneration Committee obviously is the statutory committee, and we do have automatic membership of the non-executive members of the board, apart from the chair of the audit committee. So there is a set membership. There are people who generally are in attendance but aren't voting, and that's usually the chief executive, myself in an advisory capacity, and if you do need any other executive advice, the other executives can come, but they're not voting members. And then we do need the partner members, and that is where we may find we're in a position where the non-executive members are conflicted. So that is generally the it's a fairly set membership of this particular committee.
Okay, thanks, Julie. So I don't think there's anything else we need to do around approval other than approve the membership, which is the statutory one, and the 4 partnership members who've agreed to be part of the Remuneration Committee. And I'll just check with board members that they're happy with that and whether there's any other comments people want to make before I pass over to Ellen. No? Okay, thanks very much. So if I can go to our non-exec chairs then, you know, time is pressing on this. I don't want to stifle the debate, but I just want them to talk about how they see the challenges of creating the committee at the moment, and then perhaps throw that out with some discussion, because I think as members of the board, you will want to make sure that those committees are working effectively. I did talk about the non-exec membership from your different organisations. I've had a really good response there now about people and who they want to be part of that. So we'll pull that together. You will see from the email I sent out before, if your chairs have circulated it to you, that the intention would be not to invite your executive members to that committee routinely, but to bring them into the committee as and when the committee felt they needed further information or evidence from them in relation to delivery within your particular workspace. So, Ellen, I'll pass over to you, and then perhaps we'll open it up after each committee for a brief discussion.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So just to introduce myself again, I'm Ellen Donovan, and I'm chair of Remuneration Committee and also the Outcomes, Quality and Performance Committee. Probably the Outcomes Committee is probably the more challenging, but just to touch on RemCom, basically Remuneration Committee, as with other organisations, is a core committee. We've in the main lifted the remuneration terms of reference from what's been proposed from NHS England, and mainly the whole purpose of the Remuneration Committee is to agree pay policy and pay frameworks as well as appointments. The intention is that we won't be meeting sort of on a regular basis. It'll be probably once or maybe twice a year. There might be some additional meetings over the coming month where we are settling into appointments of certain executives. So that's basically Remuneration Committee. I'm happy to take any questions, which I'm hopefully Julie will be able to answer in the main. No?
Okay, thanks, Ellen.
Okay, so that's fine. Okay, so I'm now going to go on to outcomes, quality and performance. And as Jeff sort of mentioned in his opening comments, I think there's a lot of work to do. So I think we've got the basis of a committee that's built on some of the previous work that actually happened in the CCG, but obviously working in a very different way system-wide. The committee exists to scrutinise the robustness and to gain assurance that there is an effective system of governance and internal controls. I'm reading that directly from the terms of reference. And basically within this committee, I think what's really key is, you know, Jeff mentioned the key purpose and the key aims. That we move to a more system-wide approach, that very importantly that we hear the citizens' voice, and I'm not sure we've landed on an appropriate mechanism for that, but that's really, really important, that we hold the executive of the ICB to account for the delivery of the operational plan, but we do so in a supportive and collaborative manner. So for me, what's really, really important is to tackle the really challenging issues that are stopping us from achieving our plan and getting the right people in the room to try and move forward on that. So that's the sort of spirit that I'm sort of looking to set this up. One of the challenges of the committee at the moment is to agree the members of the committee. I think I'm not going to read them out because I think you can see them in the terms of reference, but we've got a significant number of members that we're actually looking for. I think what's really important is that we identify the mix between non-exec and exec so that we get the right decision and the right support within that committee. And I will be working with the exec of the ICB over the coming month to try and really establish who those members should be, and we'll want to do that in a collaborative manner. So very happy to take any thoughts that anybody has on anything that I've said so far.
Thanks, Ellen. And I think we might develop this a little bit more on item 6 when we talk about the single oversight framework. But just to say that we're going to have to puzzle our way through this, but our committees need to add value. And I think all the stuff you've talked about, really important. On membership, we really do need to make sure that both the clinical voice and the citizen voice are contained right across all of our boards, but also within the committees as well, because that, you know, that's remembering where we've come from. And I think the ICPs, our local partnerships will play a really important part in that as well. Maria.
Thanks, Jeff. I just wanted to get clarity on the role of the representation from some of the provider NEDs, and I think it's great that this has been opened up to them. I just wanted to check the kind of formality of that status, because I know one of the proposals had been also to rotate them, and particularly on a committee like REMCOM, whether there was an expectation of representation in that way there. So I don't know if that was Ellen or Julie.
I don't think there's an expectation of NED involvement in REMCOM. On the committees, I've asked for all of your chairs to put forward people who they think, one, have got an interest, two, have got the capacity, and then we will look to rotate that. I think we'll come up with some proposals, Maria, and share them with your chairs to see that they're happy with that. And I think those members, we're not asking for a lot of people. I think we're looking for people who can be representative and actually represent others as well, and then come back into the organisations. But I think there does need to be some rotation because, for example, if you nominated people across the 5 committees and we appointed them, I think it's helpful for the other organisations to get an engagement with that as well. So I think we'll come up with some proposals. I am conscious, and the conversation I've had with your chairs has been, you know, I know how much our NEDs do within our own individual organisations, so this can't be onerous. But I do think it's going to be critically important because it will create the link, particularly, well, on all the committees. I was going to say particularly around performance, but it's not particularly around performance. It's all of those committee areas. And like Ellen has said, I think the executive involvement will vary. We already know on things like the People Committee, there's a huge amount of executive involvement or officer involvement across the system. But I think they choose to do that because there's a particular interest. So we just got to try and get the balance right. And I'm really keen, and shoot me down on this by all means, but I'm really keen that we create a little bit of disorientation in the first couple of months to make sure that we puzzle it through in the right way. I'm getting a lot of pressure from people to say, I expect I's to be dotted and T's to be crossed and exactly know who's going to be sat where and when. Well, we could do that, but I actually don't think we'll come out with the best solution. So there's a little bit of holding our nerve around it. That said, we cannot create risk and we cannot create a situation where we're not safe and money's being distributed in the right way. So we'll come back to you on it, Maria, with some proposals. And I know that Ellie has been working on that for us in the last couple of days. And Maria or Xavier sent me a list yesterday of nominations from NBT.
Okay, thank you. Good to hear. Thanks, Jeff.
Ellen and then Dominic.
Oh, hi. I just wanted to thank Maria for that contribution. Maria, I you know, everything that Jeff has said, sort of, I endorse. And I suppose what I'm also looking for in the committee is to be a committee that can really support and to help. And you know, I'm really keen to have members around the table who, you know, are really keen to work in this system way and can actually sort of work together to tackle some of the challenges that we've got. So sort of that culture and can-do attitude is really important to me.
Thanks, Ellen. Dominic?
Thanks, Jeff. Mine is a brief point and a follow on from Maria's actually, and I'm taking it upon myself to speak on behalf of NEDs because I think they're far too polite and public spirited to raise this, which is just to point out, if we ask them to do stuff in the ICS, that we'll basically ask them to volunteer their time because the terms of reference, or sorry, the pay and conditions of provider NEDs are set by NHSEI, and therefore there is no provision for us to vary them. If there is some opportunity to, in some way, compensate NEDs of providers for additional work that they take on in the ICS, and in some way maybe a soft kind of benefit rather than a specific financial benefit, I think that would be a kind thing to do. And Jeff, I know you've been a NED, so even though you're probably too polite and public spirited to say it, I would hope you have some empathy with what I'm saying.
Yeah, Dominic, you know, whatever we're spending is public money, so whether we're paid from one organisation or another. But I take your point. Michelle's raised it with me as well. I have raised it with Shane to look at what opportunities we might have around an honorarium or some element for NEDs for attendance at committees. So we'll continue to look at that. And I checked it out with Elizabeth yesterday, and I didn't get a warm feeling around it. I think it'll be our decision in the system to think about how we actually do that. But I think it's a fair point. The point I made to your chairs is I know some of your NEDs are working huge amounts of hours, some work a bit less, but you know, and so your chairs need to prioritise where the NEDs spend their time. My appeal was actually, I think this would be a really worthwhile use of their time for your own individual organisation as well. But Dominic, point well made, and I will go back to Shane on that and look at whether we've got some opportunity on maybe an honorarium for attendance. Thanks, Dominic. Ellen, anything else you want to raise at this stage? Or can I pass on to Jaya?
No, I think that's fine, Jeff. I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover.
Okay, thanks, Ellen. Jaya.
Thank you, Jeff. We face the same challenges. My name is Jaya Chakrabarti. I am the chair of the People Committee for both the ICS and the ICB. I'm new to health, so I'm coming at it from a data and geeky kind of perspective. I'm looking forward to working with everyone around the table. The terms of reference that we put together, Julie Bacon has done a phenomenal job pulling it all together and doing all the heavy lifting. I think the only thing that I've managed to add from my perspective has been trying to frame it from a people perspective. As you'd imagine, a people committee is about, there is no system without the people. And I'll quote from the document itself: the purpose of our People Committee is to support our integrated care system workforce of 50,000 people through our integrated care board team of 500 people and partners in order to deliver and maintain the well-being of our 1 million citizens in Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloss. So that's the challenge that we've got, and I'll be working very closely with all the people around the table. The key thing that we have in terms of challenge, again, is the same one that Ellen has raised in having the right people around the table and also at the right time. We are at risk of being unwieldy, and what I'd like to do is be very strategic in the use of the experience that we want around that table. And we'll have to change and evolve along with the system that we are trying to create. So I'm expecting that we'll be quite agile, fleet of foot, and open to doing things in a new way. I think that kind of covers it, because the same challenges that all of the different committees will face will have come up around the table, and I don't want to leave nothing for the others to say.
Thanks, Jaya. Any questions for Jaya on People Committee? And as I said, you know, we are presenting terms of reference today. They're not cast in stone. I think we need to get an agreement in statute, but actually we've got to have some flexibility around this. Any questions for Jaya? No, thanks, Jaya. Steve.
Thanks, Jeff. And just to echo, very similar, so I'll add to the points around the paper rather than go through the paper. It's there for information. Our starting point was not to lose, I guess, the good work that had already happened. So thank you to Sarah and to John Caput, who were involved in this area before the ICB was created. So we were very clear, we need to create something new, but we also need to learn from where we've been and make sure that we don't lose anything of value in that transition. Clearly, we've been informed by the Constitution, we've been informed by all the helpful advice that comes down from NHSEI and all of the governance surrounding all of that, and we've made sure that we've captured all of the must-dos to make sure that we are appropriately governed and managing the business to feed into higher parts of the system at national and regional levels. That said, we had a big debate around making sure that we were true to the purpose of the ICBs and making sure that what we were doing really did focus on outcomes in population health and healthcare, inequalities in outcomes and experiences, enhancing, very importantly for this committee, productivity and value for money, and also making sure that we support the broader social and economic development. And the committee has got a very broad brief. It is strategic in focus, but we need to make sure that we are delivering on the operational side and monitoring appropriately. So what the terms of reference set out is a starting place where we think we are able to deliver against all of the objectives, but we want to keep this under review. We recognise that as we go through this, at the beginning, we are very much going to be focusing on what is the starting place in quality and finance, and how do we create, in effect, stability there to be able then to move into some big strategic discussions around how we're going to use the resources effectively across our system. And that's then reflected in the way in which we've put our membership together and how we will bring in expertise onto the committee as and when required. So in broad terms, Jeff, it's very similar to the other committees. This is our starting place. It's not necessarily the end point. It creates an environment where we can explore the function of the committee, that we can satisfy our statutory obligations. But I'm also keen that we really get to the point where we agree as a system how we're going to ensure our finances and our quality is where it needs to be. And once we've done that, stabilised that and got that run rate right, then we can start being really creative and innovative in how we're going to tackle the other dimensions of our agendas. And I think the quicker we can get onto that, the better, but we've got to sort out the basics first.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Any comments or observations, Steve? No. Okay, thank you. Alison.
Morning, everybody. I'll be the chair of the Primary Care Commissioning Committee. Similar to other colleagues, there are a set of must-dos, but I think we want the emphasis of the committee to spend its time on the strategy and the implementation of the strategy. I'd like to say thank you very much to Dave Jarrett and Lisa Manson for helping and pulling together the terms of reference. They are terms of reference which will suit us. We have looked at other terms of reference from other committees across the region. And interestingly, there is a chair of Primary Care Commissioning Committee meeting with the region in July. So it'll be interesting to see how others are developing, but it's very much a work in progress. I want to support what Ellen said really about the tone and the approach of the committee. It is about agreeing something, delivering something, holding ourselves to account, but doing it in a really supportive way. So actually, as chair of committee, I want us to succeed, and I want us to do it in the right tone, right cultural space. One of the things that we do need to work through is that we don't duplicate things that might go to other committees or omit things. So we need to make sure we don't drop any balls. So had a good conversation with Julie, because one of the key strands of the Primary Care Commissioning Committee is to
have oversight and delivery of the primary care strategy, and it's 4 elements, and one of those is around workforce development. So really having a conversation with Julia J. I know, apologies you couldn't make the meeting, but just making sure we don't drop it, but we have something in the right place. I can see some similar conversations coming with Ellen around primary care outcomes, quality and performance. So I think we just need to keep talking to each other, and we are doing that. One of the areas that we haven't landed is around the patient voice, and it's quite helpful that Shane briefed the CCG Primary Care Commissioning Committee on Tuesday, saying he is doing a piece of work across the whole piece to look at a structured way of getting the patient voice in. He said there were 3 voices that were really important to him: the professional voice, the voluntary community sector voice, and the patient voice. And there was a lot more that he wanted to do with his exec colleagues. So I guess as Ned committee chairs, we'll see the outputs of Shane's work on that. The 4 core purposes of the ICB are front and centre, and it's really clear. There's two aspects of the primary care. There is delegated commissioning for primary care, and also during this year we will be developing joint commissioning with NHS England around dentistry, optometry and pharmacy, for those to have delegated responsibility from next April. So there's going to be quite a lot of movement, I think, in what the committee looks at over the next few months to make sure that we are fit to take on delegated commissioning of those 3 areas next April. The membership is clear. The area I would want some comments from colleagues is we're very fortunate in our patch. We have a local medical committee, excuse me, we have One Care, and we have now the GPCB. And actually what I'd like to do with those colleagues is for them to identify who they think would be right around the table. We've put some suggestions in, but actually I think that's a conversation now that the terms of reference can be agreed. We can actually say, who do you want around this table working with us? Because it's really important that we have good, strong representation to deliver what's going to be crucial for our system, I think. I probably wouldn't want to say much more at this point, Jeff, but happy to take questions.
Yeah, thanks, Alison. I think that point about representation from primary care is really important, and if we can generate that debate with perhaps those aren't in the committee here as well, so others like Brisdoc, LMC, etc., that would be really helpful. Julie.
Thanks. I suppose just an observation, Alison, and that is that wider representation of primary care around pharmacy, dental, opticians, and it feels very GP. And I just wonder whether to give some thought to like the LPC and some of the others. And then the second bit for me is, and I know it's close to your heart, but it's that bit about integration and where we see that sort of strategy around how primary care in its entirety is integrated more fully in that sort of out of hospital, and just whether we need some of that sort of out of hospital provider representation, both in terms of mental health and physical health. So just some observations.
Yeah, great, Julia, absolutely right. In terms of the LPC, LOC, LDC, sorry to be jargony, the local dental committee, optometry committee and pharmacy committee, we will be asking them to come on in shadow form, hopefully this year because we want them to be a really big part of it, because from next April the committee will look very, very different. I think you're right about one of the 4 planks of the primary care strategy is about integrated models of care. It's really, really important. So that needs to come out very strongly in terms of what we do at committee, and again, who's around the table. I would really welcome any provider interest around this committee table. I think this is such an important strand for the rest of the system that I would welcome anybody with a strong interest.
Okay, thanks, Alison. Thanks, Julie. I've got John and then Lisa.
Thank you, Jeff and Alison. I would obviously I'm here as an elected GP approved by the board, but I'm also the chair of the GPCB, the General Practice Collaborative Board. And it was just to say that at our last meeting, we approved our new terms of reference, which actually include Bristock and the LMC on our board membership. So the easiest way of ensuring that we get the right people serving on these committees is for us to have a conversation and then take it back to the GPCB for consideration, and then we'll get some willing volunteers for you.
Wow, fantastic. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks, John. That's really helpful. Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. Just to sort of just in support of Alison, obviously one of the key responsibilities of this committee is to ensure that the ICB is honouring the commitments within the delegation agreement that obviously the primary care medical services are currently delegated through, but also the preparatory work for the delegation of local optometry, pharmacy and dentistry from the 1st of April 23. And that also is one of the reasons why it's really important for those members to be there. So both the committee is ready to have that oversight of those services, but also to ensure that those members are understanding their role within that committee.
Yeah, I think that's a point well made, Lisa. You know, if the committees are going to be effective, they'll have to be about accountability as well as representation. So, yeah, an important point. Thank you, Alison. Thank you, everyone. So, finally, John Cappock.
Great, thanks, Jeff, and morning, everyone. As Jeff has said, I'm John Cappock. I'm a former NED in the CCG, and I will be chairing the Audit Committee. So the Audit Committee is the second of the two mandated committees that we are required to have. So in kind of similar to Ellen's REMCO, the terms of reference are relatively prescribed with expectations around what should be included. But that said, the key components are reflected, particularly around governance, risk management, internal control, internal, external audit, counter fraud, and obviously freedom to speak up. In terms of how we've refined them, well, as a former member of the CCG Audit Committee, I've had the benefit of being able to use that committee as a sounding board for these terms of reference. So I've had essentially informal and formal scrutiny and input, which has been really helpful in ensuring that we think that we've gotten to a point where these are pretty fit for purpose. I've also had conversations with executive members and with the internal auditors who will be servicing the ICB for the duration of the contract that they have, and who are also supporting other systems, and that's bringing really helpful insight, and their input has been invaluable. And similar to others, I've had an awful lot of input from Sarah Carr, who has done a lot of the heavy lifting on this, and my thanks to Sarah. So my sense is that the terms of reference largely do the job right now, but they will need to be reviewed in due course and at least annually. The terms of reference for audit are also backed up by a work plan, and normally you would take a longer term view of the work plan. As things stand, we've put a plan together, a draft plan, which reflects the governance and assurance needs of the ICB in the first year, and that reflects the unusual challenge of having two sets of year-end accounts to negotiate, one for the final 3 months of the CCG, and then one for the first 9 months of operation of the ICB. And it also picks up the assurance work around the emerging priorities of the ICB. But I want the Audit Committee plan to be very responsive to the long-term plan. So when that has emerged and when we have that agreed, we can reflect that in the work. And I think that picks up the point that's coming up in the chat and that others have been making around duplication and not tripping over one another. I suspect that it's inevitable that we're going to have a little bit of that as we negotiate the first year. But I think as we get that longer term plan, we will be better able to do that. In terms of the approach, similar to what everybody else has said, I'm really looking for a partnership approach, that we're not duplicating what's happening in other organisations elsewhere in the system. This will need to evolve. And in terms of the membership, I have rather less of a challenge because I've chosen to have a reasonably small committee. So the committee will have 4 members with 2 ICB NEDs, and the intention is that will be Steve and myself. So we will, I think, do a double act in terms of finance and audit. That's an approach that has worked really well in the CCG. And while the challenges are different, I think that continuity will help. And I'm aware from the conversation that have been had that we will hopefully identify a provider NED who might be willing to sit on the committee and to provide that that outreach. I've got a slightly different ask though to other colleagues in that I would also very much welcome a local authority representative as the fourth member of the audit committee. So it's a request to the three local authority chief execs that if you could have a discussion and either identify a candidate from among yourselves, because I know you're all qualified and have done this sort of stuff previously, or if you could potentially identify a suitable candidate to represent the local authority community, whether a director of finance or a section 151 officer, that would be really welcome. We've talked about rotation, and I would be very happy with rotation, you know, for an annual thing, provided that people getting involved are willing to see the annual cycle through, so that the benefit of the knowledge that people gained over the course of the year, we then have available to us as we go through the year-end process. And we will be meeting 4 to 5 times a year. And if you're happy to identify somebody, I'm very happy to have a chat about what would be entailed and what we're really looking for. So that's it from me, Jeff. Thanks. Okay, thanks, John. And you read my mind, because I was just about to introduce that point about local government engagement, because you've asked for an officer attendance there, but I've had a lot of response from health providers about non-exec involvement in committees. I've only had Helen come back from Bristol about involvement with committees. And so, Joe, I'll bring you in first, but it's one for Mike and for Dave as well, which is, do you think there's a role to play for elected members or officers on any of the other committees? Joe?
So just start with John's initial question. Sorry, I can't seem to turn my camera back on. Oh, now it's working. Yes, absolutely happy to take that away, John. And, you know, I think 2 of the 3 of us actually have got finance backgrounds. So, yeah, absolutely happy to take that away and potentially do it myself, to be honest. So, and indeed, Jeff, I'm happy to take that point away as well and have a discussion across Mike, Dave. I don't know whether either of them have got a particular view, but yes, we would want to have some involvement, I think, across the system. So, but maybe one for us to reflect on more.
Joe, thanks. I mean, I think it will be helpful for you, for the 3 CEOs, to work that through about what that looks like. But I think it would add value to the committees. I think you would just bring a different dimension in, and I think that would be hugely helpful. You'd also get reporting back into the council, but how you want to manage that, I think, you know, the 3 of you need to perhaps puzzle that one through. Mike or Dave, I don't know whether you've got anything to add to that.
Just to say, Jeff, I think it's probably best if we do have a collective discussion so we can agree kind of best deployment of effort. Happy to do that with Joe and Dave. Okay, great. Thanks, Mike.
Happy to agree with that, Jeff.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Yeah, that would be really helpful. And perhaps we can just make a note of that one in the minutes for as we go through. Okay. So are people happy to agree the terms of reference as they stand at the moment, accepting that what we said, there will be different iterations, they will come back to the board, and I think we will need to make sure they're fit for purpose as we go forward. But is there anybody who feels that we can't agree?
Ellen's got a hand up, Joe.
Yeah, I'll bring Ellen now. So no, okay, Ellen.
Yeah, sorry, nothing about sort of agreeing. I just would like to just piggyback on the end of that conversation and ask if local authority chief executives could consider the same for the quality outcomes and performance committee as well, because there's a number of, I think, representatives that would come from your areas. That would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen. And I think, yeah, that is about the 5 committees. And I recognise that John may have a particular ask around an officer for the risk and audit committee, but it might well be that is an officer or it's an elected member. But let's leave that with Joe, Mike and Dave. I think you'll come up with the most appropriate solution for us there. Okay, so thank you on that. I mean, there was a lot on that item. I think we probably did need to talk through. But if I can move us on to the standing financial instructions then, Sarah.
Thanks, Jeff. So the standing financial instructions sort of form a key part of the governance handbook, which will be published on our website. And the purpose of them is to really ensure that the ICB fulfills its statutory duties around carrying out our functions effectively, efficiently and economically, and they're an important part of our control environment. We need to be familiar with these, all of us as board members, and they're basically here for approval today. They've been developed in line with the national guidance and with and sort of through iteration in the discussions with NHSEI as part of the sort of readiness to operate work that we've been doing. So happy to take any questions or but really just seeking for them to be approved today. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Any comments or questions on the standing financial instructions? So are we happy to approve them? Julie?
Yeah, it's a general issue. It's just one observation. And going into the detail, I think I was just trying to find it. I think I was looking at, for example, it was the contract value limitations. And it was that over the life cycle, I think it was like £1 million. And I was thinking, well, actually, that's going to be nothing. And I suppose it's that bit when we're looking at policies, referring back to some of the other principles. So we talk about subsidiarity and how we pass things down. And then it just felt, gosh, that's going to be quite a low level that has to come to the centre. So I suppose it's just a warning for ourselves or a caution that we don't centralise things inadvertently. So don't need a specific on should it be $1 million, should it be more. But as I say, £1 million, if you gave a voluntary sector a 10-year contract, you could be talking of an £80,000 a year contract, you know, a couple of people. Does that really need to come for sign off at the centre?
Fair point. Sarah?
Yeah, I think it is a really good point, Julie, and we were just having some of this discussion yesterday. But I think what we need to sort of do, and we've talked about, we're doing some more work as a group of directors of finance thinking about decision making in the system. And I think over the next few months we'll want to iterate these, looking both at what has that meant for us in terms of the work that's had to come back to the ICB board, and therefore do we need to change those thresholds. So, but like I say, at the moment they're based on the sort of national guidance, so we'll need to sort of suck it and see and work through and iterate them, I think, as we go.
Thanks, Sarah. And Julie, I think this is a symptom of the system where there's tight control from the centre, and we as an ICB need to think about what we're going to push back against, you know, and if that doesn't give us the flexibility to be able to spend because we have to keep reporting on everything, then that suffocates us. So, you know, I think this is going to be an interesting challenge for us over the next few months about what we push back with and what we don't. But I think that's a fair challenge, you know, because if you're constraining people in that way, then you know, how much governance do you actually need around it? Dominic.
So mine is a follow on from Julie's really, and it might be that I misunderstood what's in the SFIs, because my reading of them was that this is for, in essence, it's for the things that previously would have been in the CCG. So if we have a contract for something and under that contract we then let a number of subcontracts, that doesn't need to come back to the ICB because there's an overarching contract governing it. Because clearly, as a £330 million provider that doesn't just provide services to this commissioner, but also to BSW, ICS, and to specialised commissioning, there's no way we could operate by having to figure out who do we have to go to for site. You know, it just isn't going to work. So my assumption is this is more for things that aren't covered by master agreements rather than things that are already covered by master agreements. But if that's incorrect, please say so, because then we'll need to think quite hard about that.
Thanks, Dominic. Sarah?
So you're right, Dominic, this is for the ICB. The arrangements, that's the work that we're doing as directors of finance, thinking about financial decision making across the system and how we need to together make decisions, because we are all responsible for the financial position of the whole system. What you may be referring to is within contracts where we've got non-recurrent financial support in place. There is a contract clause that basically says which decisions have to come back to the system, because obviously we know that we've got underlying issues within provider organisations at the moment. So that is slightly separate to this. This is specifically for the running of the ICB.
Okay, thanks, Dominic. Thanks, Sarah. any other questions around the this item before we move to approval? Okay, okay, so we're happy to approve it. Great, thanks very much. So can I move on to the core policies that we've got to agree? These are pretty standard for any statutory organisation around conflict of interest and risk management framework. But perhaps I could pass to Julie first of all around the conflict of interest and gifts and hospitality.
Yeah. So I think the paper does contain a number of things, mainly about the use of policies in the ICB, and obviously what we have done to get the ICB started is use this suite of policies already existing in the CCG, and that's what we've actually done for the conflicts of interest policy and the gifts and hospitality policy. You'll see that they are being updated to reflect appropriate branding and appropriate terms where they have changed for the ICB. And these two policies together will meet our obligations to have a standards of business conduct policy. So we're essentially saying proposing we lift and shift those across and make the appropriate adjustments to reflect it's an ICB now. We've also suggested the same for the risk management framework, but bearing in mind that, you know, they're not then set in stone. This is to get us started. We can always revisit policies and frameworks once we're within the ICB. I think just to mention, there's a couple of other things in this paper. So we have also referred to these standard policies that don't need to be in the governance handbook, such as the commissioning and HR policies, and we've literally just lifted and shifted them across, and we are in the process of rebranding those and making those adjustments to reflect ICB, such as committees and positions. They're in Annex D. They don't need separate approval, but I did want you to make you aware of those, and also that we've since added a couple more to the list, which is the supervision policy and the CHC operational policy, which have been agreed in June. So it's just worthwhile being cognizant of those two. And also we're suggesting through this paper that we continue to use the existing arrangements for the policy approval framework, and again just adjust that to the ICB. All these things we can revisit once we're operating as an ICB, but literally they are to get us started as an organisation.
Thanks, Julie, and we do have to have these obviously as a statutory board. They're pretty standard, having looked through them. Is there any questions anybody's got or any comments on the content? Alison.
Hi, yeah, happy to approve. There's just one typo in the risk management one, and I can't find the page now, but where the clinical executive committee has been crossed out in yellow, but it's still referred to later on in the document, so it's just a typo. Just a question on legacy policies, I guess, Julie. There's quite a few that are overdue their review date that we're inheriting as an ICB. Are there any risks associated with any of the other policies that are way beyond their review date, or is there a process to prioritise?
Yeah, with the legacy policies, that's been a lift and shift list. To be honest, those legacy policies tend to be ones that have to be transferred in, and you don't review those because they are legal. That you have to adopt them at the point of transfer, and then they're sort of set in stone because they've been TUPE'd in. So I think the review date is just an existing one that was on there.
Okay, thanks, Alison. Thanks, Julie. Perhaps I can pass to Sarah then on the risk management framework.
Jeff, I wasn't planning to say anything further. I think Julie sort of covered it under her introduction. So yeah, very happy. Like we say, we've lifted and shifted these very much. We will expect to continue and change these as we go forward.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So any comments from anybody before I move to approval? No, okay, so we're happy to approve those core policies. Okay, thank you. So the final item before we break then is around the handover from the CCG, the due diligence assurance, which Julie will take us through. I think it's appropriate for me to say at this stage, you know, a big thank you to everybody that's been involved in the CCG. I think John chairing the clinical commissioning group, Julia with her contribution over the last 3 or 4 years has been significant. and I think the CCG have done an excellent job in a difficult time, bringing together services in our locality. We are going to experience a change with the ICB, and there's some uncertainty for some of our staff in the CCG, which we need to make sure that we do our best to deal with that in the most appropriate way. But we do have to do the official handover from CCG into the ICB from today, and a lot of work has gone on to make sure that goes through in the right and the most appropriate way. So, Julie, do you want to just talk us through items that we need to consider around the due diligence assurance? Thanks.
That's fine, thank you. Thank you for that, Jeff. Yes, there has been a transition working group that has been working through all the actions that we've needed to close the CCG and establish the ICB. And the guidance for that has largely been in a due diligence checklist, which was a national document, and readiness to operate statement that we worked through. NHSCI have regularly attended our meetings and have also checked our progress with those documents. And also we've had audit involvement, and we did have an audit of the due diligence checklist. And in particular regarding assurance, the Strategic Finance Committee on the 27th of May went through both documents in detail. They were then signed off by Chief Financial Officer of the CCG and the CCG Accountable Officer, so Sarah and Shane, and submitted to NHS England an improvement. There was then a final readiness to operate meeting with NHS England and improvement where they discussed final aspects of being ready to operate, and there were no significant areas of concern raised. And on the 17th of June, the regional team confirmed that there were no ambers or reds in our readiness to operate, and there were simply 3 items that were green and still open at that time, simply because you had to do the actions in late June. They've now been completed, and then this week we have had through formal confirmations. So I think it's worth recording that the CCG received a very positive performance review from NHS England in improvement, which provided assurance regarding what was being passed across to the ICB. That is in the papers. Obviously, sorry for the late uploading of those, but we did only get them literally within the last day or two. NHS England and improvement have also confirmed our readiness to operate in writing, and that is in the papers too. And I do know that the legal establishment orders have been completed and are on NHSCI's website. And I think just relating to concluding matters for the CCG, there will be the production of the 3-month set of audited accounts and the annual report, and those activities are in hand. But I do think that particularly the documents that have been uploaded to the annex do provide the assurance required for the correct handover from the CCG to the ICB.
Thanks, Julie. John.
Thanks, Jeff. I just thought it might be helpful for the board just to be aware of my prior involvement from a CCG perspective. This has been, updates on this have been reported monthly to the Strategic Finance Committee of the CCG since the end of the year, and they have been to every meeting of the Audit Committee and governing body meeting. And as Julie has said at the late May meeting of the Finance Committee, we went through the readiness to operate statement pretty much line by line and satisfied ourselves. So I just want to kind of add my thanks. I think this is an absolutely excellent piece of work. The last update we had a few days ago, well, it would have been last Friday, was that we had the 3 green outstanding. So it's remarkable, really, that everything has been completed and that we're in such good shape. So I just kind of want to say that, having been part of it, I'm very happy to endorse and to recommend this to the board.
Thanks, John. That's really helpful. And yeah, I would reiterate, there's been a huge amount of effort to do this transition across in the due diligence. So, as we all know, when we've done this sort of thing previously, it's a big undertaking. John Hayes, I don't know whether John, as the chair of the CCG, whether there's anything else you want to add?
No, not really, Jeff, other than to just say thank you for those nice words at the beginning. I think we did a good job in challenging circumstances, and I'm very proud of the legacy that we leave and the foundation that we've set to hand over to the ICB as our successor.
Yeah, thanks, John. So can I ask board members whether there's any other comments people want to make or any other observations? This item is just for the board to receive, so we've got assurance around handover. There's no approval needed, but is there any questions anybody wants to raise? Okay, so I've made us up a bit of time. That's always good news, isn't it? It means we're not labouring things. It's 5 to 11 at the moment. Perhaps if we take a break now for 15 minutes, if I can ask people to come back at about 10 past 11, I will then try and make sure that we aim towards closing the meeting around about 1 o'clock. So if you want to take 15 minutes, if we will use the same link. So if you just mute your microphone and turn your cameras off, I'll join you back in again at 10 past 11. Thank you, everyone. See you all soon. Thank you, everyone. So it's 10 past by me, so I'll press on if I can. So we've got two discussion items really now around the operational plan and budget and the single oversight framework, which will hopefully generate some debate. We've covered the issues off around approvals, so thank you to everybody who's been able to remain so that we have been quorate. So that's really very helpful. Thank you. So without further ado, I'll pass to Sarah first of all to talk about the operational plan and budget. And Steve, I don't know whether you want to come in afterwards as well. So Sarah, over to you first of all.
Thanks, Jeff. So just really a few things we want to do under this item. Really, just one, make sure we're all sort of familiar with what's been submitted now as the final operating plan that was submitted on the 20th of June, following the delegated sign-off that I know boards had given to the sort of chief execs, the finance officers and the finance NEDs. So that happened on the 17th of June and the plan was submitted on the 20th of June. And then the sign-off of the budget that in effect the ICB inherits from the CCG, because obviously we've had to prepare a full year budget that gets taken over by the ICB as we move into this 1st of July. So wanting to just take us through that. So obviously the context is hugely challenging. This is the first full year budget that we've done for a couple of years as we move out of the sort of extraordinary financial regime that's been in place to support the COVID response. So we're moving back to a financial regime that's population based. And the planning guidance, you know, that was published in December expected very low levels of COVID. We know that hasn't quite been the case. So it's a sort of challenging environment in which we're working. There's also very significant inflationary issues that are caused by sort of global factors that again weren't anticipated at the time when the planning guidance was published. But obviously we've had subsequent additional allocations to reflect that, at least in part. Appendix 1 shows the updated operational plan that was submitted on the 20th of June. I think in terms of performance issues, there are probably three key areas where, although we have improved on what was submitted in the April operational plan, there's still three areas where we're not achieving the sort of expectations, and we will expect to have quite significant sort of performance management around. And those are so three of the mental health areas, so out of area placements, perinatal and the community CAMS contacts. And then on elective recovery, the position that we've got in terms of both our long waiters, but also our activities as a percentage of 1920. And that leads, you know, there's a connection with financial risk around that in terms of the way that elective services recovery funding is working and the potential clawback that will come from that. And then particularly a challenge around the 62-day cancer performance, particularly at MBT. So those were just the things I really wanted to draw to your attention in terms of the operational plan and the particular performance issues. In terms of the budget then, we have been able to prepare a balanced plan for 22-23, but it is really important for us to understand that that is only through the use of non-recurrent reserves and budgets. So we have a £76 million deficit as a system. We did quite a lot of work last year on our medium-term financial plan. So we do have a plan to address that deficit position. The critical bit is going to be making sure that we deliver that. So the medium-term financial plan that we worked up last summer and that was signed off by both the executive group and the partnership board in the autumn last year, we will continue to work through and obviously refresh it as part of the strategy work that we do this year. Probably the main the other item that I really just wanted to sort of reflect on is there are risks to this plan. Obviously, like I say, the significant inflationary issues that are, you know, global in nature, they could go further than we have taken account of in this budget, and we'll continue to work closely both within sort of health, but also with our local authority partners, particularly when we're thinking about the fair price of care work as well. Discharge to assess is another area where there is risk. We are transitioning from the hospital discharge programme to the discharge to assess sort of model that we've all signed up to as part of that business case, but we have significantly more community beds open now than was anticipated in that case. So that does represent a risk to us. We have set up a risk reserve in effect through the section 256 that is helping to balance that off. But at the moment, even that looks under pressure. So that is an area where we will need to continue to focus our attention. There is also potentially financial risk associated with ambulance handover delays, where obviously if we're not able to achieve the trajectories that we've set out, then there are additional costs that the ambulance service will need to incur to ensure that we're able to maintain safe levels of ambulance services. The elective services recovery funding, we showed the potential risk around that funding being withdrawn due to us not delivering the levels of activity as an unmitigated risk, and that is because nationally that money is available to the NHS, and there is still further work going on to really to understand where everybody's getting to in their recovery, and there may be modification to those rules. So I think we understand that, for example, there will be no clawback of the Q1 underperformance on that. So that will help in terms of that risk. Those were the main issues that I wanted to draw out, but we're particularly asking today for you to note the sort of key assumptions, principles within the financial plan, the impact on the ICB savings requirements, the underlying system deficit, and then to approve the financial governance principles for managing the budget during 22-23 and to give approval to this budget. So happy to take any questions that you may have.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So there's a lot in there, isn't there? We know that the financial situation is such that we do need to make significant savings. We also know that the way finances are being measured post pandemic are going to be very different for us. And we also know that as a system, the performance data suggests that we're less productive and our performance has not got any better. So there are some significant challenges for us. I suppose I'll throw open to comments and questions. The first one for me is, in presenting this today, you touched on it at the start. What degree of agreement have we had across everyone in the system about the priorities that we are set in here and about the assumptions that we've made?
So I should have highlighted that in the introduction, Jeff. This has very much been completed as a system piece of work. So in terms of the overarching financial plan, that's very much been a piece of work that's been done across the Directors of Finance, obviously within the NHS, but absolutely this is a complete reflection of the work that's been done and reflected in all of the positions across the system, every organisation. So it is consistent with that.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. I'll bring Will in a second, but perhaps worth reiterating that many of the calls I take part of nationally talk about the accountability of the CEO of the ICB for system performance by way of finance and productivity and overall performance, and then our responsibility as a board for his accountability. Now, it's a tough ask, isn't it, when you haven't got all the levers, but you know that is the challenge for us going forward. So perhaps let's open this up for a few questions. So Will first of all, and then Steve.
Jeff, thank you, and Sarah, thank you for presenting this. You would expect me to make this comment, I think. I was a little bit surprised not to see handover delays, given the scale of them, feature in the top three. But the point is more around risk, and it would be remiss of me not to highlight to this board there is a you know, if I approach this from my ambulance perspective, there is a considerable risk around handover delays, and I think the financial and operational impacts both on this board but also on my ambulance service, the trajectories. And I'm looking at this not just with this system in mind, but I'm looking at it across all systems, and I would say the same in other system meetings. The trajectories are going to be quite difficult to achieve, I think, over the course of the next 12 months. So just reinforcing the risk that you've highlighted around handover delays. And I suspect, you know, we're planning for handover delays to continue and potentially starting to be resolved properly in about 3 years' time. So that's quite a long time away. But it would be remiss of me, Jeff, not to highlight the risk from my perspective.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. This is a conversation that takes place daily at the moment, and this is the point about the focus on the here and now. But it's a really important one, isn't it? And actually, ambulance delays are not the sole preserve of the ambulance service. There's a you know, you haven't created the climate for that to happen. I don't think that's inefficiency in the ambulance service. I think it's a whole system issue to resolve, because you can't resolve it on your own. So amongst our committees and our board, we've perhaps got to be a bit bolder about where we invest across the system, and you know, that's going to be a challenge. But you know, this one's not going away, is it? And actually, if we put the patient and the public first, it's a critical issue for them. But you know, again, Shane will undoubtedly talk to people about this, about the balance of the responding to the immediate pressures, and also about how we are getting upstream and dealing with the prevention and the population health and health inequality, etc. But Will, this is a key part of it. Sarah, I don't know whether you've got a response on Will's point there.
I mean, I think, Jeff, I did outline that as one of the key risks when I was giving the introduction. So completely consistent. I guess the only thing I would say is, well, completely understand your perspective in terms of the sort of timeline that you're thinking. I think our ambition in this system is to resolve this much faster than 3 years. That, to me, feels like complete failure. So I think our focus will be on really monitoring the trajectories that we've already set out, that are based on actions that are in train within the system. And particularly, you know, that the biggest issue for us is our flow within the system, and the work that we've already done in getting to the system agreement around the model of discharge to assess and continuing with that implementation, I think is key to resolving some of those issues. So, you know, our commitment is to really drive that through, and we don't expect to have ambulance handover delays for 3 years.
And very, very quickly, Jeff, if I may, I'm not saying that 3 years is acceptable. What we're struggling with at SWAST is trying to get a direct read across between the trajectories and the actions that are going to see those reductions. Not one to press further now, but thanks, Sarah. Happy with the answer. Thank you.
But Will, I think whether this is at committee or whether it's at the board, I think to listen to a patient's experience of being sat in an ambulance for 10 hours waiting to go into the emergency department, and everything that plays out with that, might be helpful reminder for us as a board that we're talking about real people, we're talking about our relatives here, we're talking about ourselves, we're talking about our most vulnerable people. So you know, I'm conscious that actually getting that citizen's voice in to talk about this will be helpful for us, and I think we just need to think about how we do that one, and I will give that one some thought. Steve, Maria, then Ellen.
Thanks, Jeff. I guess this is our wicked challenge. If we don't succeed in this space as a system, then frankly, we're in real trouble. And I think Sarah and I were having conversations over the last few weeks about, okay, we've sort of inherited where we are. Now we've got to find a way of working together to move those dials, and we're going to have to be creative and focused, and the whole system has to work effectively together as we work out where we've got resource that we can put to shift those dials. And we've got to be really honest about this. If we get ahead of ourselves, if we get this sorted and we sort the run rate out so that we then are not in deficit chasing our tails, if we can get focus on the quality, and the finances, of course, usually flow as a result of that, then we've got permission to do all of the good stuff, all of the stuff that we want to do. And that's our big challenge. The sooner we can get this bit sorted, the better we're going to be in terms of working on those big strategic agendas. But if we don't grip this fast, if we can't get this sorted, then it's very difficult to do the other stuff, because we'll be firefighting all the time. My other point, I think, is as a system, there will be things that we'll want to do to try and reduce. So this is the prevention piece, so that we take some of the pressure off right at the start of engaging with our citizens and patients. So we're going to need to do both of these things and balance it. And I guess certainly for the starting place of the ICB, we've got to keep focused on this very quickly and very early. Otherwise, we'll just keep spiraling in the wrong way.
I know some of this might have happened before, but it would be really interesting to see at the board some evidence of what the system flow looks like, and not just necessarily flow in our own organisations, but from early stages right the way through, because we may identify there some of the hiatus in the system. I'm just not sure that we've done that. And Steve, from your own organisation, that academic support around that, my experience tells me that's very, very helpful, because you actually identify where the blockages are, and they're not always where we think they are. So I'm just not sure we've done that as a system enough yet. I think we probably need a conversation about where that best sits. Perhaps I'll talk that one through with Shane, but I think those are good challenges. So Maria, Ellen, and then Deb.
Yeah, sorry, risk of repetition, but as will know, within a provider, there's probably 5 or 6 meetings per day about ambulance handover delays, what we can do. There will be, each board will be looking at this on a regular basis and receiving the information about it. But actually, it needs all organisations to come together. And as Steve just said, I think this is a real test for the Integrated Care Board, actually, and this system to come together and work through it. We absolutely do need everyone from start of pathway to finish of pathway to be effectively involved and to move resources into the right place. And like everybody else, I would be very, very concerned if we haven't sorted this out in the next 3 years, hopefully long before that.
Thanks, Maria. Ellen?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Just listening to this now. What was quite interesting, in the early conversations with Rosie and Lisa, we'd identified that, and Peter, that we might look at ambulance handovers as part of quality performance committee. But this is probably an early test, Jeff, of you've just mentioned that it's a system issue, and do we need a bit of academic sort of understanding before we sort of dive in here, and various committees start sort of delving into this issue. So I think Steve's point about being creative and focused is really key. And I just think we need to stop and think about how we address this as a set of committees and a board and a trust level, so that we're not busy fools sort of all trying to improve the situation and work together. So I'd be really keen to just stop and think and plan how we move forward on this.
Thanks, Alan. It might be helpful if the Neds stay on after REMCOM just for 10 minutes to talk about how we coordinate our efforts and where we look at that review of what's going on. I think that'd be really helpful, so that we are not duplicating effort. I think there does. I haven't seen it yet. I could be wrong. Maria, you're probably best placed to tell me about whether we have done that work, which looks at the whole patient journey, or the whole citizen journey, really, but definitely when they become a patient through the whole of the system. I know we've done it within our own individual organisations. We've done huge amounts of lean thinking, but I'm not sure we've done that at a system level. I mean, Maria, I might be wrong, because you've been looking at the issues around emergency care. So,
yeah, I think we've got really good information within the hospital. So I think per provider, we probably have that. And as you know, hospitals are measured within an inch of their life about everything. So there'll be really good and clear metrics. I think perhaps for us, less so at the other end. So what happens, what are the pathways then into domiciliary care, other residential, repats, mental health, etc. I think, we'll have some numbers, but we won't be tracking the journey and the blocks within that necessarily in the same way. So I think there is something to be done. I think it would be really helpful to process map and check that we are commissioning and overseeing services in the right quantities for each part of the flow, because clearly we're not at the moment because we're blocking up.
Yeah, and it's an opportunity for us, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, thanks, Maria. That's great. So I've got Deb, Joe, and then Sarah, and then Dominic.
Thanks, Jeff. And this is a fascinating conversation. And one of the things that we've been doing, which hasn't got to partnership board or to chief exec level yet, is a thing called the Care Traffic Control Programme, which is starting to build upon all of the things that we've talked about, and really starting to focus, rather than just the information within an organisation, the interrelational flows. So what we've got at the moment would be really good to come and share with NEDs. It's on the list for the digital NEDs review meeting, which I think is next week. So we will do a demo of where we've got to there. And with Lisa and John's support, we met with all of the COOs this morning to take them through. This is a data plus behavioural change programme. It's not just about data. It's about what we do with the data once we've got it. All of the DASs in the local authorities have been incredibly helpful in terms of starting to open up where we think we've got data gaps that we might be able to bridge, and finding the ways to do that. So as Maria says, make sure that we've got as much information at all of those parts of the system where we have gaps now. So there is a live programme that's addressing this, which links to the reprocurement of our Alamac system, which Lisa is leading, and the bigger shared data and delivery platform, which Sarah's been leading as SRO. So it all links in. So there is a big programme around it, but what we need to do is make sure we get the designs and the priorities right for the ICB, because listening to this conversation, to galvanise this board around that programme of work would ensure that it's rocket fueled rather than something that's, some people are interested in. So I think if we could do some of that, that would be an amazing opportunity as we go forward.
Thanks, Deb. And I think if Shane was here, he would talk about the intentions with the director of service delivery role, and this is where someone has got the reins of bringing us together as a system, and the care traffic control is a good one. I'll be great for the NEDs to see that next week in digital. I'll join that session as well. Sarah, did you want to come in?
That was exactly what I was going to pick up, Jeff. So yeah, happy that that's been covered.
Dominic and then Julie.
Yeah, just a brief perspective from mental health, and Maria's comments are well made. Mental health has not had the rigour and discipline around these things historically that acute care has, and this is something we've been thinking about a lot, both as a general thing, but also in particular regarding our out of area placements challenge, which is a real, it's the wrong thing for patients to send them a long way from home, but it's also, creates a crippling financial situation because we have leakage. Two really interesting things that I'd be very happy to report back on a little bit later in the year, perhaps. The first is that we are trying this month, just starting today, to run a perfect month in mental health, which is the same concept as a perfect day or a perfect week that they run in acutes. So we know we have all the policies and procedures in place already. That means if everybody was following them, everything would run perfectly. But it doesn't. So what we're doing is lots of rapid PDSA cycles to say, okay, what happened today? What can we learn from that? What can we correct for tomorrow? So that hopefully by the end of the month, we've got a much better stance. And you might say, why would it take a month? It's just because the average length of stay in mental health is about a month. So it kind of makes more sense to do things there, whereas in the acutes, it's sort of 4 to 5 days. So we work to a different battle rhythm. The second thing that's really interesting to explore, which has actually come from some work we've been doing in the neighbouring ICS of BSW, using some COVID funding, we put in 2 voluntary sector workers into 2 of our wards with a specialism in housing. And when a patient was first admitted, they sat down with the patient and the care team to say, you know, where do you live now? What have you got? What do you need? And all of that. And what they identified was that half of the patients being admitted into wards had no safe place to return to. And then they planned for their discharge from day of admission. And I think it was 93% of patients on discharge had a safe place to go to at the time of discharge. Incredible statistics there. And again, it's just a PDSA cycle on 3 wards, but there's something there about how do we look with a QI approach at really moving the dial on these things. It's within our gift. And the benefits in terms of both quality and finances are quite significant. So a little bit further down the line, I'd be really happy to share some of that work either here or in one of the subcommittees to think about how do we learn from that and how do we double down on some of those things. So I just thought the board members might find that interesting.
Dominic, I think it's really helpful, and it does reiterate, doesn't it, that where we are in an organisation looking down, sometimes not identifying the on-the-ground practical issues are the things that unblock us, not necessarily the big strategic things. I mean, it needs both, doesn't it? I think that within our system, the local partnerships, that's going to be the real advantage of that. So they should be seeing the here and now stuff that will be feeding into the board. So we need to make sure that we're capturing that in the right way. But yeah, I mean, I think we've all experienced that, and it'd be really good to bring that back into the board and see how that's playing out. It'd be really helpful. Julie.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on, you know, I've noted the workforce ambitions in obviously the operational plan, and it's going to be absolutely key that we've got the workforce to deliver that. And there is some significant gaps that we're looking to fill. So it's not just getting people in, it's actually the onboarding them and what that does to your substantive workforce and what that gaps do to such as clinical placements. And I think it's just quite timely that we can make sure that those are very visible to our system people plan and programme, so we make sure we've got that connectivity in terms of the activities they're doing and the ambitions in the operating plan.
Okay, so I mean, there's an awful lot in this plan, isn't there? And Sarah's taken us through how with the consultation that's taken place in it and the conversations. I haven't heard anything yet from our local authority chief execs, or maybe from Sirona. I don't know whether you've got any of you have got any comments that you want to offer. Joe?
I think, to be fair, colleagues have said a lot of what I would offer in terms of, I think it's a system challenge. It will require transformation and capacity, some of which bluntly we don't have. And I might sound a bit depressing as well with the cost of living crisis. There's a real challenge, I think, that will get worse across our system in terms of capacity, because many of the staff and the employees, which are largely through our supply chains, if you think about people who work in residential homes or work in domiciliary care, are at that lower end of the pay scale. So some really significant challenges, I think, for us as a system, many of which aren't unique to our system, are regional, sub-regional, national challenges. I was at the LGA conference and we used that as an opportunity to lobby nationally around some of those challenges and for additional funding. But we are very aware of it. On our CEO's Away Day, we discussed at length, what we needed to do in this space, and absolutely we need to take a life course view, because actually some of this is about people maybe not living well, so therefore they're not aging well. So I think that point about focusing on outcomes across population ages is really important as well. So, but I don't really have any solutions other than we are focused on it and we are committed to trying to make things happen. And I think I gave a thumbs up to Maria's point about what Deb updated us, because I think there is a culture shift as well as a data shift as well, and ensuring that we're on the same page. And we absolutely recognise that there's risk. There's risk across the system. I think we also accept that, different types of risk, but there is risk across the system, and we need to work as a system to try and improve those outcomes for individuals.
Okay, thanks, Joe. That's really helpful. I think what it's reiterating is this cannot be pushed down into one committee, because what you talked about there was workforce, which is people, cuts across everything. We've got a performance issue in there, we've got a finance issue, we've got a risk issue in there, so it is actually embedded in all of our committees, isn't it? And then obviously the primary care one features as well. So we just need that. It'd be really helpful for me to speak to the NEDs about how we're coordinating our efforts on that one. Sarah, is there anything else that you need from the board on this?
No, not. I don't think so. I think just really wanting that, just testing that everyone's happy to approve this as the budget for now, recognising all the work that we'll need to carry on doing together as we move forward.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. And as we can see, if you know, if we're not identifying our shortfalls, we get financial penalties from the centre, or we get a financial disincentive or an incentive if we hit those targets. And I know those can sometimes be a little bit arbitrary, but I think it's the point that Steve made. If we're not sorting out some of that here and now stuff, then we're going to hit massive challenges. So, well, it'll be interesting to see how this one progresses. It's a mammoth task, but you know, it's not one I think we're going to be able to walk away from. Of course not. Is there anything else? Any other points anybody wants to make around the operational plan before I move us on? Are we happy to approve it? Okay, I'm seeing lots of nods. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to everyone who's done the work around the plan. I know how difficult that is and getting people around the table, but you know, well done, and we'll see how it pans out. Okay, can I move us on to the outcomes, quality and performance? The agenda item is the single oversight framework and scorecard. Perhaps before I pass this over to Lisa and to Ellen, just some context really. We from the NHS get a single oversight framework and scorecard, and you know, I can see the importance in that and the value, but sometimes that can be very much wedded to new public management, old ways of working, a target-driven culture. And increasingly, my peers across the country are having that conversation that says, you know, this is quite insular very often. It's not thinking about all of our partners. It's not thinking about the whole approach. So again, this is one of the ones that I think myself and the 41 peers across the country are already pushing back and saying, you know, where is the context around social care here? You know, if we are just focusing on single issues within the NHS. Now, they're big issues, but that just gives you some context, really. So we have got this single oversight framework. I think there's some gaps and omissions in there. I think our committee will have to work in a different way, but we'll have to be minded of this because this is where our £2 billion of NHS funding flows from. So, I don't know whether, Lisa, you want to start or whether Ellen wants to start on this one.
I'll kick off, Jeff, and then just a couple of minutes and then pass on to Lisa. Okay, so just a couple of comments from me. Before passing over to Lisa, as we said, the committee is in the process of considering what metrics we're going to be using to monitor quality and performance of the committee. I think you're absolutely right, Jeff. This is only part of it, and there are lots of gaps, which Rosie will continually remind us of in terms of quality and in terms of our partners. So for the next few months, we're going to continue to use the metrics that we used in the previous CCG, which was very sort of well run by Alison, that committee. And we're going to work on a new set of metrics. I've asked the executive, we are going to run a couple of very small committees during July and August, Jeff, to just try and work through some of these metrics and also the membership of the committee. And then I'd expect those to develop over time. And as you said, they need to be wider than just these sort of narrow set. I also think it's not just for the quality committee. It's much wider than that because, you know, it's for the board to really monitor our performance and quality of service. Before I just hand over to Lisa and Rosie, because I think Rosie's going to step in as well, I just wanted to mention two pieces of two documents that sort of really brought the work of the quality committee into sharp focus for me. One was page 23 of the NHS oversight framework, which I think was in the papers, which talked about the NHS England has a legal duty to annually assess the performance of each ICB and publish a summary of findings. Now, I'm sure everybody will be familiar with that is sitting around the table, but for the likes of probably me coming into the NHS and the likes of Jaya, that might be sort of new information. So I think that's really important to be aware of. And the second is the segmentation rating, which was on page 13, which is a segmentation rating for ICBs and trusts. which is basically a rating of 1 to 4 according to performance and need for support. And again, many of you around the table will be familiar with this. 1 being consistently sort of performing at a high level, and 4 down to 4 where it's very serious position and in need of support. In the first instance, the NHS England are going to put everybody into category 2, which is sort of, you know, basically performing well. And then in the first half of the year, they will establish an appropriate segmentation rating for each ICB. So my approach as committee chair will be to seek assurance from the executive that there are firm and robust actions to delivery of the operational plan, especially the 22-23 plan, and to test those actions. I think what we've just discussed, Jeff, that it's not going to be as simple as just the Quality and Performance Committee is going to be looking at this. You know, we're going to have to be really clever about how we approach all of this, so that we are effective and that we are performing increasingly well. So just with those opening comments, I'm now going to pass on to Lisa, who can probably fill us in an awful lot more detail, if that's okay.
Okay, thanks, Ellen. So Lisa, and then Rosie, obviously, if you want to come in as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Chair. So just if I can take people back a little bit, and Ellen reminded me that obviously the NHS are very familiar with this document. So the single oversight framework started as a mechanism for having an NHS consistency in terms of how it assessed both NHS trusts, NHS Foundation trusts and CCGs. And forms part of the accountability agreements that CCGs and now ICBs have with NHS England, but also forms part of the provider licenses. So this the NHS England went through a consultation period in 21-22, and through that consultation period we took something through executive group, which I imagine my chief execs will have forgotten about, because I certainly forgotten about the presentation I'd taken back, and we fed back into that process. But it was published on Tuesday, so this is my apology for the papers being late. This was published late Tuesday alongside the metrics. And the difference now is this is very much a system oversight framework. This is pulling the system in together in terms of a collective set of metrics, and the nature of particularly the segmentation framework is we all fail together or we all succeed together. And I think that it feels very different in terms of this oversight framework. What has also evolved within this is the core themes. So there are the 5 core themes that sit within the framework, which are for our, you know, obviously improving for our population, the delivering the ambitions of the long-term plan. So picking up for ourselves in terms of quality of care, access and outcomes, preventing ill health, reducing inequalities, people, finance and use of resources, and leadership and capability. And the really key difference that this feels like, and I think absolutely it has been recognised, is the 6th theme is for us to define our local strategic priorities, the local metrics that are important. And I think that would be really helpful for us to pick out in the discussion following this, Jeff, if possible, just in terms of being how we start to describe those, but in a meaningful way in terms of for our system. We're really clear in terms of the NHS England approach in terms of oversight. Clearly, they'll use the data that we already submit as part of our routine monitoring that both NHS trusts and other providers feed into the NHS England system. But where we've worked with them in terms of the memorandum of understanding that will be put in place between the ICB and NHS England is actually how we do that through our existing governance structure. So we don't set a separate set of reporting arrangements up, but we actually do it through our existing governance structure. We work with NHS England in terms of the conversations that we're having. So if I could refer to our elective performance, Sarah's already flagged that in terms of one of our areas of risks. We already have weekly meetings with NHS England around elective performance. We'll be putting into the MOU, that is where the place in terms of assurance has been around those metrics, because it's clear and it's visible working through. So we can both take within our governance arrangements, the arrangements in terms that are in place within NHS England, but also where we take assurance. So we're not duplicating, we're not pulling colleagues into multiple meetings and trying to make sure that we work that through. And I think it's really important that we do that and we really build on that. And I think the conversation, Jeff, that you said about having with the non-execs about how we get our committees to work together is really important to being able to make sure we can do that joint oversight. The segmentation is a real challenge for us. And part of the segmentation conversation that we will have is actually working with NHS England to demonstrate, yes, we have performance challenges, and recognising a number of organisations as we've exited the last 2 years of COVID have performance challenges, but that we have robust actions and robust governance around them in demonstrating where we are. And that assurance is being delivered back to NHS England because from our fundamental principle about delivering improved outcomes for our population, that is our driver, but we need to evidence that back through the segmentation description and actually making sure that we're really clear within that. Helen, in our conversations, has been really clear in terms of the roles of the executive that support the Quality, Performance and Outcomes Committee. Being really clear how we make sure that we are providing that assurance, where the challenges are, but also the deep dives that we'll need to do to make sure that we have that clarity as we work through that. But also being really clear to both the committee, but also to the board, where we are seeking support and how we use that. So, for example, NHS England referenced in the document around segmentation, things like the Getting It Right First Time team, Right Care, the NHS retention programme, just taking it across those core breadths of our arrangements. And the final bit I just wanted to flag before we move on, if I hand over to Rosie, is the metrics. The metrics do reflect the 22-23 operational plan, which is obviously core to the terms of reference of the committee. But actually, I think it's really helpful because it does take a slightly broader perspective than just the core ones in the NHS plan, in the sense that it also builds in some of the QoF metrics from primary care, but also some of the metrics that we don't yet routinely see. So if I think about dental, and we talked about the primary care clinical commissioning committee earlier, actually we don't get dental metrics. That will be coming through to the dental to the PCC as we work through 22-23. But it also gives us that position in terms of both line of sight, but also being able to influence that as we go into delegation in terms of those arrangements. So we will start to then be able to pull in and see the services that have been commissioned by NHS England on our behalf and how we can influence and challenge those as we work through that process. So the metrics are much more refined, and I think that was one of the reasons why the publication was delayed till late Tuesday, was because the metrics were refined from the sort of 250 plus that we were expecting, and our scorecard was built upon, to a much more refined just over 60. And I think it is very helpful in terms of refining that down, but being really clear that they are the ones that we are focusing on in the sense of the NHS segmentation. But I do think it's really important for us to be able to build, particularly in theme 6, just in terms of what those local strategic priorities need to be, but also thinking about the future point as opposed to just being operating in the operational here and now. But what are those metrics that we would want to be seeing coming into the next, both through this year, but also going into 23-24. If I hand over to you now, Rosie.
Yeah, that was the bit I was going to focus on primarily, was this opportunity that the 6th domain offers us to focus on what we think is really important locally. And whilst I agree with Lisa about it being a positive thing that the metrics have been slimmed down, they are quite light in a number of areas. So they're really very light around children. They're really very light around quality, patient experience and voice. So I guess this gives us a great opportunity in practice as part of our discussion about how we, through our committee structure and through the ICB board, decide what that 6th domain ought to look like. And what our system priorities are going to be. And I'd also encourage us to think about how we explicitly link through to performance and quality, and make sure performance and quality is inextricably linked. So Ellen's talked about us developing our metrics and our domains for the committee, but actually, how do we look at an issue, but look at it in a really rounded way? So we think of the 3 domains of quality, we think about having really good citizen voice, we think about how that ties to performance and how any performance gaps are then creating a quality risk for our people. And then also we've talked a lot in the run up to becoming an ICB about how we become a really learning system. So how do we draw in learning from other parts of the system, such as our safeguarding activity and our safeguarding boards in all 3 local authorities? How does that influence how we address these domains? And how do we also draw in feedback from our system quality group that might be identifying risk or will identify risk as well? And how do we tie it into our health and care clinical exec feedback as well? So just something for me about it being a real opportunity to take that step into a fully learning system and a rounded quality, performance and outcomes piece, where everything we do is reflecting into our population outcomes. That's all I was going to add. Thank you. And I think just next steps is developing theme 6 and then feeding that through into the committee structure, Jeff.
Okay, thanks, Rosie. Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Rosie and Lisa. I think we're in danger of forgetting about the other half of the integrated care system, which is the partnership board. So we've talked in that partnership context about the need to revamp our outcome framework, Jeff. And we've discussed the need to make sure that the metrics, to use that phrase, if that's the one we're using today, flow from our outcome framework. That outcome framework needs to await the production of the health and care strategy. So I think we've got some quite significant thinking to do about how we're going to mesh these two processes, because I think it would be really unhelpful if we give a signal to the partnership board that this is going to run ahead of the production of the health and care strategy and that wider discussion about the outcome framework that has to flow from the health and care strategy. So I'm not sure at the moment we've got a plan for how we're going to mesh those two things together.
So Mike, you've sort of read my mind. I jotted down Mike Bell and partnership board, and this is the point I was going to make about getting our governance right. Because I actually think if we don't get our governance right here in the ICB and then in our committees and the link into the partnership board, I will not be able to resist the pressure coming from the NHS nationally, which will arc around the partnership board and arc around the integrated care board into individual organisations. And, you know, that's, if history teaches us anything, that is very common, where we get a ministerial concern which filters then straight through into individual organisations. And that's my appeal, really, to make sure that we do get our governance right, because that gives me a chance to be able to resist some of that, Mike, and go back in and say exactly what you've just said, which is we're putting the cart before the horse. I know we want to agree these things, but we also need to make sure we're considering that wider conversation. I can tell you now that rarely is there and these tend to be weekly, but rarely is there a conversation amongst chairs and chief execs with the centre that doesn't say, hang on a moment, you're only considering part of the pie. You're only thinking about health, and where is that wider determinants of social care and what we're trying to achieve in an integrated care board. So I think there's going to be a bit of puzzling through on this, Mike. I think there will be learnt behaviours that have been replicated over time. And we do know within the NHS, we've still got a massive number of people in those policy functions and sat at the centre who will have will have to, I was going to say justify their existence. That's not fair, but actually demonstrate their worth in what they're doing, bringing it down into the system. So I'm all ears on that one, Mike, about how we do it. I have suggested to Shane that myself and Mike Bell need to meet weekly, if not bi-weekly, to talk about how the ICB and the partnership board are absolutely as one in the way we're taking this forward. But that said, we can't ignore what's coming down the line around system assurance. So, Mike, back to you really, because you may have a view on that.
Well, if we feel compelled to do that because that's a requirement of our license to operate, if you like, as an ICB, I think it's really important that we put on record that we know we're going to have to revisit this once we've got an integrated care strategy, an outcome framework, and a partnership shared set of metrics, because I think otherwise we're in danger of, once the partnership board gets going, they're going to be looking at this and saying, well, hang on, where are we in all of that? So if we have to do it, I think we need a really clear statement. And I think, Jeff, it would help if you at the partnership board could kind of explain and acknowledge that. Otherwise, we're going to get off on the wrong footing right from the outset.
Yeah, I absolutely agree on that one, Mike. Lisa.
So I was just going to suggest something similar, which is I think it may be worth us responding in terms of our theme 6 by saying we are clearly undertaking both the start of the conversation with our citizens which started today. We've got the work that the partnership board is doing on the outcomes framework, but also the health and care strategy. So we almost say, these are the things that are underway. These will define our local strategic priorities. There may be a couple of things, and I'm just particularly conscious in the quality area, things that come through our quality surveillance group that aren't covered in these metrics, but we are holding that position in terms of our local and theme 6 until we've undertaken that piece of work, because then that allows us to move that particularly throughout this year, but into 23-24 as a defined set of local strategic priorities that we then respond as part of our response to NHS England as these are our key. And actually theme 6 isn't one quadrant of 6, it is actually sitting across all of them.
Thanks, Lisa. So, Mike, I think there's an action in this for Shane and or me to push back to the centre and do exactly what you and Lisa have just said about making sure, we won't be alone on this. My guess is there'll be 41 other systems doing exactly the same, if all the conversations I'm sitting in are anything to go by. And there's a little bit of a culture shock in this from the NHS at the centre. They're not used to that pushback about locality. So as I've said all along, we can expect some bumps in the road on this one. And we do need to make sure we pick the right battles. But I think this one can't go unignored. Otherwise, we start measuring the wrong things. So, yeah, I think let's capture that as an action for me and Shane to go back in on that one in the right place at the right time. So good. Rosie.
It was just to follow up on Lisa's point, thank you, Jeff, that and when you're talking to partnership board, the system quality group and the health and care professional executive are both multi-agency, multidisciplinary. So if we're using them to feed our 6th theme, then it will come from a system voice of your clinical professional leaders as well.
That's lovely. Thanks, Rosie. Alison.
Yeah, my comment's been picked up. It's around the ambition and the local flexibility around theme 6, that we have to do what we have to do in terms of assurance feeding that beast, but that actually we have to be more than that. And I agree with Rosie's comments about it being more rounded, but I think I think theme 6 is the area that we can really demonstrate our ambition as an ICB.
Thanks, Alison. Lisa?
So I just wanted to move, if I may, just to think about just in terms of our reporting. And one of the things that, as Alan said in her introduction, is obviously we are developing the metrics. Our intention is obviously these would be included within the metrics that sit in the 5 themes that go through into our reporting, as opposed to producing a separate soft report, which we will do as part of our returns to NHS England. We will identify the metrics as soft metrics, but we'll report them in a broader sort of performance report. So the ICB isn't constrained just by those 60 odd metrics as part of our performance reporting going forward, because otherwise we end up just looking at, some small subsets, because actually when you look at the mental health metrics, they're really small compared to the range of services that we commission for our population.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're points all well made, and let's think about how we record the activity. But it is back to my first point: if we don't get the governance right, there won't be the confidence at the centre that we've got a grip on these issues. So we really do need to make sure that we're consistent on that. Julie.
Just a comment really, and I suppose for assurance for the board, of course the system oversight framework doesn't officially apply to Sirona because we have that weird we're CIC, but I just wanted to give assurance that normally I didn't think I'd be sitting here saying, we want more performance, but we absolutely see ourselves as equal partners in that health, and then health with other partners. So we'll be a full player in this, but I think it will occasionally need us to remind NHS England, because as we know, we've had to do loads of workarounds sometimes to get support in, because we are a CIC, and as a system we've done that, but it's just making sure, because they will want the answers about the organisations on their lists, and we'll need to just keep reminding them that there's a big single community provider as well as all the other bits.
Yeah, and I think there's a real opportunity for us here at the moment. We have hit a point where the NHS have got a new chair who is asking the same questions around, what have we got? Why have we got the people doing what we are doing at the centre? What flexibility are we giving people more locally? And I've invited him down to come and see what we're doing. But But I agree, you know, if we are truly going to approach this as a system, it can't be about just NHS directive. Although, you know, Lisa made the point, we do have to make sure we're accountable, of course. Rosie.
It was just to follow up on Julie's point, Jeff, and she's absolutely right. We do have to lobby in all sorts of places. So I guess it's just something for us in all of our committees to recognise the fact that, you know, for all sorts of daft things, sometimes community interest companies get left out of funding streams and things. And also data collection around workforce. So we just need to keep pushing really hard on our community interest companies that provide core NHS services not being seen as different to our trusts.
Okay.
Mary does a great job. Ruth May knows all about Mary Lewis because Mary says it in every meeting we go into.
I mean, all of that is really helpful. Again, I will reinforce this in the conversation with the Neds later, which is it's probably where Ellen started with introducing this item of we have got the NHS system oversight framework, but we as a system need to be thinking more broadly sometimes. So Ellen.
Yeah, just my final comment, Jeff. This was a really helpful conversation. And I think it comes back to what you said, governance. I think Mike's comments are really, really important about meshing together the Partnership Board and the ICB. And I think these last few conversations about making sure that the committees work together, but also that the committees work with the board, because there are some really deep system-wide deep conversations we need to have at a board level before we rush out and do sort of committee type work. That's it for me. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been a really helpful conversation. Thank you, everybody. Is there anything else, because I'm conscious there's a lot of detail in there, but is there anything else that at board level people would like to draw out or discuss from the presentations we've had from Lisa, Ellen and from Rosie? Any other points anybody like to make? Okay, well, thank you. I think that's been a rich discussion. We've got a couple more points before we finish, and then I will move to if there's any questions from members of the public in attention. The first one is the action log. Some of these have come out from the CCG, I think, and some are from our last shadow board meeting in June. The first one on the list was around the draft digital strategy, Deb, which was public health being involved in the programme. Has that one been done?
Yeah, there's some invites that are going out this week to everybody, and public health are included in those.
Okay, lovely, thank you. The second one, Rosie, was around asylum seeker hotels.
Yeah, we've picked up with the local authority colleagues around language support for people living in the asylum hotels. It's not provided necessarily through the bar system because that causes problems geographically, but there is support going into the local authority asylum seeker hotels. So yeah.
Great. Okay. And the next one was for Shane. The letter that was sent by the regional team to our acute trusts around performance, to be sharing that with the governing body. I don't know on the action on that. I presume that's come out from the CCG governing body. And whether that's something at this stage we'd want to share with ICB members. It was a reminder around some of the stuff I've already touched in the conversation around productivity, performance, finances. I don't know if Maria is still with us because I know she was taking a call at midday, and Eugene isn't here. So I don't know whether anyone else could update me on that action. I think it's probably a CCG one.
Yeah, so I'm I think very happy in terms of to take your steer if it would be helpful just to circulate that to ICB board members just so that they've got the context of the request that went into the trust chairs. I think that probably would be helpful.
I think one of the things that we went back with was I understand why Elizabeth Omani as the regional director needed to write to the chairs and chief execs of the acute trusts around performance. One of the things that myself and Shane have gone back in and said, once we're established from today, that really should come in through the ICB and then we should manage that performance. Because again, this is another example, not intentional, it's not Elizabeth's intention at all. And I will ask her to come to the next board meeting to just introduce herself to those who don't know her. But this is a chance how unintentionally we could be arcing around individual organisations, which will create a response from our acute trusts, which might not be joined up with our system approach. So Sarah, I'm not sure there's a need, but the time's probably gone on it really. I'm not sure there's a need to circulate it, but because I think I've probably given people enough of a summary there, unless people particularly want to see it. There was a couple of other items. So the action plan delivery for comments, I think that was a CCG one that's closed. Quality performance reports closed. Purpose and aims of the new ICB. Shane was going to do the external messaging on that. We've done that, and we've done that today. So that will have gone out to a lot of partners. A huge number of letters and communications. You'll see some of that in the media, I guess, today. That final one, I think, is still, it says September for a timescale. I think we still haven't worked that one through enough yet around the description of involvement of third sector, citizens' voice, clinicians, about how we're making sure we're embedding it. I think that's an ongoing action, but we need to make sure that we keep reviewing it to ensure that we have got the citizen's voice and the clinical voice and the power of our third sector in how we deliver our services. That was it on the action log from the last meeting. Perhaps I'll just take the opportunity to review some of the actions that have come out from today. Then I'll move to the standing agenda items for the next meeting. So Sarah Weston, I'm sure you've been jotting a few down, but some of the ones I've recorded have been our local authority chief execs to think about membership of our committees. The function and decisions map, the point that Dominic made about ensuring that's inclusive. I think there's one in there around the citizen's voice in delays and how we're incorporating that in committees and in the board. I think that's one for me to consider. I think there's one for Shane around the care traffic control and how he's articulating that out to board members. And then finally for me to meet with Ned, and I'll start that after REMCOM today, about how we're making sure we're pulling things together. And then finally, the last item that Mike had mentioned around that pushback to the centre, really around partnership board and making sure that we are not running ahead of ourselves, so that we are thinking about locality and health and social care, not just health. So that's what I had. Sarah, did you capture anything else? Or anybody else really that I've missed?
Excuse me. The only other thing, Jeff, that I noted was that Dominic had offered to report back on those two AWP initiatives, the Perfect Month and the housing specialists on the mental health wards.
Yeah, of course. And so I mean, it'd be really helpful to factor that into the agenda later on in the year as we move forward. So thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dominic. Mike.
Yeah, I just wanted to, emphasise the point about alignment with the partnership board, because in a sense, it's not just about pushing back on NHS, because they're showing inconsistency with their own guidance. So the key overarching link is that this board has to have regard to the health and care strategy, which is owned by the partnership board. So it's just inconsistency even within the NHS. So I think it's just worth making that point. It's not about, resisting something in order to get alignment with the partnership board. It's even in the NHS's guidance. It's just, internal inconsistency as well.
No, but I think we need to remind people, Mike. So I think on that's not intentional, but it will be a way of working that people have been used to. So I think that the timescales, the deadlines, the reporting, and we've got a large chunk of people who probably haven't done a great deal of system working and partnership working. So you are right. But I do think there is pushback on it, because I think we'll continue to see it coming. And I will meet with Mike Bell to make sure we're getting the consistency across the agendas. But you're right. I think you're absolutely right to introduce that challenge as well. Because if you don't, then we end up with a bit of a problem around it. And again, when myself and Shane have attended those meetings in London, the room have constantly had to remind our executive team at the centre of the NHS around the value and the contribution of our wider partners. It's not just about us leading the system. This has to be a collective approach to it. But Mike, keep pushing back on those, because it gives us the opportunity to make sure that we've got that right. And I know you won't be a participant in the partnership board, but it'll be incumbent on me to make sure that we as the delivery board are reflecting the priorities that we've been set for us. So we just got to make sure that happens. Okay, thanks, Mike. Anything for anyone else that came out today that we haven't captured? Okay, so we've got a standing agenda item, standing agendas for the partnership board. I think in agenda setting, it'll be really important that both committee chairs and members of the board are feeding back in to see where your time is, or where our time is best spent, because we've got tons of stuff we can feed into the agenda here. But what is going to be create the greatest value for our most senior people in our system? So you will see some of the stuff on standing agenda items, and the standard stuff you'd expect, you know, minutes and actions. We've put minutes of committees. I would like to see an update from chairs of committees back at the board. You know, that doesn't have to be long, but just enough to see that we are consistent in the approach. And then just whether there's anything else that anybody feels is missing as a standing agenda item. I just wonder whether there should be something in there, and this might be a people committee update. I'll take views on it, but something around equality, diversity and inclusion. I just think at a board level, we should have that as a headline. Now, it might well be that Jaya can deal with that as an update from the people committee. But yeah. I think we've got an opportunity in setting this agenda to make sure that that's front and centre. But Jaya?
Yeah, I think that would be a really wise thing to do. Certainly once we've worked out what metrics we've got hold of, it would be good to at least touch upon what we're doing and try and keep that within focus while we go through the rest of the agenda. Certainly, I'm hoping there's some low-hanging fruit and we will be able to address things as a board overarching, because it fits into every single committee one way or another. Yeah,
Joe.
Hi, Jeff. Again, you might welcome to say no to this, but I said sort of in the providers that I've been working with, having a chief nurse medical director report is quite useful, because it can bring things in that does like things like pandemic updates, viral updates, urgent emergency care. So rather than saying, oh, we're going to do flow, you actually let the chief nurse medical director say, actually, these are the really top. I'm just aware of the fact that you're not signalling that clinical care is at the core of the system. And actually, that's a way, it's a gesture as well about signalling that clinical care is at the core of the main agenda of the ICB. It's just a thought.
Jeff, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Jeff.
I'd say yes, that is very sensible, but it's probably worth you having a conversation with Shane about how he wants to manage that, because he might manage that as part of his CEO's update, where he brings you in. But it sounds very sensible that we're doing that. I've got Julie Sharma, Julie Bacon, and then Mike, and then Steve.
Thanks, Jeff. It may sort of be implicit, but it sort of reads very governance-y. And I suppose it's that bit then, how do we pull that together to make sure we are actually hitting those, you know, high level strategic objectives that we're doing? So just something that shows then we're joining it all up and actually really looking at a high level, as I say, those key things that we want to achieve. Are we going in the right direction?
Yeah, Julie, I think you're right. And I think, you know, thinking it through, maybe on the CEO's update, that'll be divided into things like that. So you might have the service delivery director's update, the chief medical officer update. But I just think there's certain things for governance we probably need for a statutory board. That's probably what I've been given there. But I think there's an opportunity for the actual main agenda, a bit like we've done today. So we had a lot of the process stuff at the start, and we've had the conversation, haven't we, on the items towards the end. So, but please, you know, what I don't want is that people think that meeting's a waste of time. and vote with your feet. I prefer you to be saying the real value for us as chief execs is going to be focusing our time on X. So please don't be, I know you won't be, any of you, but please don't be shy in coming forward on that. Great, thanks, Julie. Julie Bacon.
Mine was along those lines. I wondered if we, at the end of each meeting, we wanted just to have a question, you know, have we worked together today? Just have we talked about the right things? Perhaps refresh, you know, the main objectives of the ICB, EDI, you know, just we could do it that way by talking about how effective we've been as a board.
Okay, yeah, I mean, happy to do that. But, you know, I think we will probably have a part 1 and a part 2 of the meeting as we progress. I'm open to ideas on that one. You know, I've chaired meetings in many different ways, and that I've done that in different settings. So, yeah, whatever people think will work, then fire it at me. Brilliant. Thanks, Julie. Mike.
Yeah, and apologies for pushing back on a contribution from a colleague in this meeting, but clinical care is not at the centre of this system. Prevention, independence and community is at the centre of this system, and I think it actually would be unhelpful to suggest that clinical care has got some kind of higher relevance than those other things. I'm sorry, I just felt the need to
Quite taken, Mike. It was sloppy language. I did mean all of that, but thank you.
Mike, you know, I think if we're not having challenges like that, then this board is not going to operate functionally. So I'm very grateful. Thank you. I do think that clinical view is going to be important for us, but you are right. It's part of the bigger picture. So good. Thanks, Steve.
It was a similar point. It was around the prevention element and community engagement piece, but also as we're reporting, given that we've been established to try and reduce health inequalities, the EDI component of what we're doing and that inequalities piece also needs to somehow be picked up somewhere. So we know we're on track, we're doing the right things, we're making a difference.
Steve, I know we've talked about it time and time again, but I think this is a key leadership issue about our values and the type of people we are, and we are in a diverse area. We should be making sure that we are, as a board, putting this front and centre. So health inequality has to be in there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve. Alison.
Just thinking about whether or in terms of deep dives or thinking time or big strategic items that we might want to have on a rolling basis. I mean, I'm not sure. For example, the Fuller report that's just come out is a really important report. It's not one where we just want to put it on the shelf. And just whether we build in some of that deep dive into a specific area of priority as a standing item on the agenda, or whether we do it a different way.
So again, I'm open to suggestions on that. I would go back to my point of I know from chairing a trust, and I know from the CCG that we could run this meeting into 3, 4, 5, 6 hours. I want to know, you know, what is going to keep you interested as our most senior people in the system. What is going to keep you at this meeting to think that was 2 hours of my time that was worthwhile? And I'm conscious that we have to do certain things, but there's the real value for us. And if we can delegate some of that into our committees, great. That's not dumbing it down. That's just making sure you have the chance to discuss things a bit more fully. So, but I'm open to suggestion. I threw in that one around EDI because I actually think that is something that the board needs to be focused on. But you are right. Where big issues come up, we might want to bring those into a board discussion. Might not be a standing agenda item, but it might be of significant importance. I completely agree with you. Lovely. Thanks, Alison. Joe.
Just wondered, picking up on the discussion that we had on the last agenda item around the interface with the partnership board, whether there's messages to the partnership board or messages from the partnership board we need to overtly consider towards the end of each agenda.
So I think we've got on the standing agenda items the locality partnership, but you are right, that needs to be that it's not on there as a standing agenda item. Absolutely.
So I
Absolutely.
read the localities as being the 6th. I suppose
Yeah,
for
no,
me,
you're right.
there's something about the partnership board and possibly even health and wellbeing boards, because I think there is something about our discussions, any key messages going out that we want to feed in, but also hearing back from.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I will be the deputy chair of the partnership board. So I should be able to bring that into the meeting. But if we want the chair of the partnership board to come along to the ICB, there may be some value in that as well, because actually then we get our elected members a chance to come and make that representation. I'll be guided by you on that one, Joe, but you are right that absolutely if we're going to have locality partnership as a standing agenda item, then we need partnership board on there as well. So yeah, we'll do that one definitely. Is there anything else that people feel that they would like to see there? Okay, I'm sure that will evolve as we start to meet, but I really do want to make best use of everybody's time. So let me go to any other business first, and then I'll open up to members of the public and see if we've got any questions that people would like to ask. So is there any other business that anybody would like to raise before I move into questions from the public? No. Okay, thank you. So we've got 7 or 8 people who've sat with us, so I'm grateful. Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening to the discussion. I hope you found some of that useful. If you've got some questions for them, if I can't answer them now, then we will do a written response to you. But I'll throw it open really. Is there anything from members of public in attendance they'd like to raise as an observation or a question for us as a board? No, so I can't see any hands coming up at that stage. So at that point, I would say our next meeting now will be on the 1st of September at 9:30. We will articulate where that's going to be and confirm the location, but I'm hoping that will be located in one of our locality partnerships, as we agreed at the shadow board. I'm grateful for everybody's time today. I think we've covered a lot of ground by way of both process and conversation. I think September now is when we sort of really hit the ground running and start to get into the hard yards. And if we can get our governance structures right for then, I think we'll be a very powerful group. So thank you, everybody. Thank you all for your time today. Have a great summer for those I won't see. And for the rest of you, I shall see you on the 1st of September.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Bye.